Good morning. It's now time for the news. My name is Pakwesi Shandov. To the very first story, the Krobi Asante Technical and Vocational School at Asokore in the Ashanti region has been closed down. This follows the directive of the Ghana TVET service after some students went on rampage on Sunday morning protesting the poor results of their predecessors in their final examination. About 40 of them have subsequently been arrested for causing damage to school property. Now, in a statement signed by the Ghana TVET Service Director General Mausi Nudeko Awiti, the closure was upon the advice of the Setre East District Security Council and the Ashanti Regional Security Council. Students have been directed to vacate the school premises with immediate effect. Now, the security services will be on hand to evacuate all students to protect lives and properties. Parents are advised to take steps to pick up their wards from the schools. Portions of the January 22 statement read. When you heard that I have been given an appointment, you were all happy. How can I go up without fighting the demons? Now, that's the question posed by the founder of the Power Chapel International, Reverend Victor Kusibwatin, when he preached to his congregation on Sunday morning. The secretary of the Board of Trustees of the National Cathedral has come under allegations of conflict of interest and double identity leveled against him by a member of parliament for Norton Sambo Okudeto Ablakwa. Lava Films Nana Boachi Yadom has more.
A lot of you were excited when you see your father up there, always happy. Papa is up there, Papa is up there. But when you are up there and you are fighting up there, then some of you are crying. How can I go up without fighting the demons in the air? And so stop all these fights and all these arguments. The question is that, is your father okay? I am 100% okay. The question is that, is your father happy? I am super happy. The question is that, is your father going to go through this? I promise you, I'll go through it honorably. So every one of you should relax, be happy.
Now, residents of Oforikrom in the Ashanti region are worried about the poor nature of roads in the area. They are also upset that the collapsed bridges in the area are yet to be fixed. They subsequently took to the street and marched along the Anloga Susansu Road, assisted by the police, making brief stop at some portions to highlight problems within the constituency. Nana Boachi Yadom, I beg your pardon again.
So these are concerned youth of the Oforikrom constituency. They are worried about the abstract state of their bridge, which not long ago took away a pregnant woman and her little baby.
Bridges constructed over huge drains within the municipality have been deteriorated by flood water, which have claimed several lives. The concerned youth of Oforikrom constituency are worried about the risk associated with using the bridges.
For about some years now, this drain has been eroding, has been expanding and evicting our mothers who sell and make a livelihood out of this place. We want a long lifespan or a permanent solution to this flooding issue in Anwaga community or Asisechi community. Hence, we are calling for a proper drainage system to be constructed along the Susansu to the Ahensan stretch. When it starts raining right now, the erosion is going to erode the seat where the bridge is going to sit on, and it is going to cause that to destroy the bridge again.
Addressing the press, leader of the group, Jerry James Suka, said the community is lagging behind in terms of development. The youth group described as unsatisfactory the performances of their Member of Parliament and Municipal Chief Executive Officer.
The concerned youth of Oforikrom protested against the municipal authorities over the broken pedestrian bridge linking Anraga to Sisechi. The poor nature of the temporary bridge
constructed by residents of the two communities, poses danger to the lives of pedestrians, especially school children. The most notable one is the recent one, which occurred, I think, 2 years ago. All what we could see was the hands of, in fact, an old woman screaming, "Munyimio, Munyimio," and there was no one, absolutely no one to rescue this woman. Ladies and gentlemen, after a series of social media protests, we woke up to see concrete pillars erected for the construction of the bridge. This has come as a relief to the people. However, we expected the contractor to excavate the ground before erecting the pillars, but this was not done. We are afraid. We are extremely frightened. When the bridge is constructed, it will be a death trap and it will continue to pose danger to our lives.
Mr. Suka also shared the frustration of the youth group on the government's controversial debt exchange program.
The program is a broad day light thievery and cruel to the innocent Ghanaian whose lifetime savings and investment have been affected by the so-called debt exchange program. We call on all discerning Ghanaians to reject the so-called debt exchange program.
They're also concerned about the abstract state of their roads here at the Oforikrom constituency. Today, they are calling for the resignation of their municipal chief executive officer, and they're also calling on their member of parliament to see to it that their roads and their bridge is being fixed within the shortest possible time. From Oforikrom, Nana Bwachidankwa reporting.
Pension Bondholders Forum, Individual Bondholders Forum, and the Minority in Parliament are pushing for governments to abandon plans to include their investments in the debt restructuring program. Now, features editor Jojo Kobna catalogues the harsh realities the program presents to individuals and their families in this feature dubbed Bonds of Sorrow.
No matter how much money you make, financial advisors will urge you to put your money away for a rainy day. They also advise investing your funds rather than simply keeping them idle in a bank account. To become financially free, they preach that invest in treasury bills, bonds, and properties. That is exactly what Roberta did. After saving and opting for voluntary retirement from her company after working 18 years, she put her savings and benefits into government sovereign bonds.
I could have put it in savings, but the savings within the interest rate is nothing to write home about. I knew that it was a government product. I'm not the only one affected. It will surprise you the number of calls I receive in a day. Okay, I have a colleague who has stroke. He is down with stroke. He also took the package because at a point when you are ill, the organization can't take care of you till, you are well. At a point, you will have to go home. You will be on half salary, and then eventually you go home with nothing. So he had to also opt in for the voluntary exit. As I talk to you now, he can't speak, he can't talk. So it is the wife who, and then another colleague who is managing, so that when he gets the coupon, they take it, buy the drugs and other stuff, and then for their upkeep. So imagine such a person, they don't even know how to relay the information to him. Because you see, it is worrying. And you can't just understand. You can't, I don't know the adjective to use. You can't just believe that something like that will happen. So we are still in, what English word are we still dreaming, or we are still hoping that, we wouldn't be roped in, you see, because it can't be true. We are still in that land that it can't be true, it cannot be true. Then how do we survive? The investment was supposed to put a smile on her face, but it has rather become a source of anxiety in giving her sleepless nights. Finance Minister, there was a communique that was explicit that individual bondholders are exempted from the debt exchange. So at least we knew that we were okay. only for the holidays, for us to see on social media that individual bondholders have been roped in. When I saw it, I wasn't crying, but tears were, all over my face.
It started when President Akufo-Addo addressed the nation, assuring investors that there will be no haircuts on investments.
There will be no haircuts.
Mr. Larry Jage, a retiree and also a bondholder, said he felt reassured when the president spoke. Subsequently, Finance Minister Kenny Furiata said individual bondholders will not be part of the debt exchange program, and that set his heart at ease.
In fact, I was impressed.
And then subsequently,
I am disappointed, especially in the leadership of this country. These are people who assured us that there will be no haircuts, number one. They assured us that individual bondholders will not be involved. If you juxtapose this in the general political representation of the past, that they will never go to the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank and the other institutions, you don't know who to believe again.
But on the eve of Christmas, the government made a U-turn. The government modified its 137.3 billion cedis domestic bond exchange program to include individual bondholders.
Now, cocoa farmers at Ohiam Penica near Samreboy in the Wasa Amenfi district of the Western region have denied a report by Jazeera News Network that cocoa farmers in the area use children as laborers on their farms. The farmers contend that journalists from the network rather persuaded them to bring their children to the farms as they wanted to do a holistic story on their challenges. Correspondent Inathalia Kwansa has been speaking to the concerned farmers.
Ohiam Penica, a farming community with close to 2,000 people under the Asenkrigua Cocoa District, produces 4,000 tons of cocoa annually. Like most cocoa-growing rural communities, they are grappling with the challenges of poor roads, education, and health infrastructure, among others. The community was virtually unknown to the outside world until they were featured on Jazeera News for allegedly engaging children as laborers on their cocoa farms. This has since gone viral and dented the image of Ghana in the eyes of the international community, with the potential of the country being sanctioned. However, speaking to the media, they claim to have been deceived as what was captured was not a true representation of how they operate. According to them, one Emmanuel Labi, who was later described as a human rights activist by Al Jazeera, led a news crew to Ohiam Penica on Sunday, November 13th, 2022, allegedly to listen to their concerns and bring to the attention of the bearers. A former assembly member of Ohiam Penica, Samuel Ofosu Asare, was featured in the news item, gives an insight into what transpired.
On that Sunday, we met them here. So after the meeting, there was members of the farmers who were sent to some of the farmers, the various farms, to check how they are feed from cocoa business. So they went with one Mr. Danlo Pauline with the family, including the children. So we went to the farm. They asked us to act for them to see how the cocoa is being processed or bring from the farm to the various homes. So they asked the children to pick some of the cocoa pods, and then they asked the mother to also act as if we are all doing farm business. So we do as they say, because do before you complain. We don't know where they are taking what they want from. So we act as they instructed us. After that, they asked so many questions and then they answered them. We didn't know that those questions that they asked or what they asked us to act was a negative impact.
Two farmers, Ibrahim Asana and Owusu Jan, added that the people claimed to be officials of Cocoa Board and therefore wanted to see the process of harvesting the pods to drying. They also sweet-talked them to bring their children along and how to go and call them from church and made them to change into casual clothes for the filming of the demonstration in a nearby farm.
America Kenyans had done near Quasiada, did to the main kai. And I'm paying for Biba, Yansway Aquafo, on by an only cocoa board for Asumon, until a Quafonso de Cocoa board near Niajepa. Until Ampa, Idimica by, a bayon war two. Near the can be saying near hearing. Men are midi kind, every sound said near hearing pounds says, it's in your mean fee more dream. What's a pension scheme? More by mine, did day and my more tram and one son actually, Mudia Mayana, and one in Assery. And no being so the truth says, say, no. Young soon see a pipe in I say, you hear so. And say Cocoa board my body, I'm because Cocoa free hakon a Dawson. I feel whom I am who have electricity. As a haqua, Oko and Caribbean and Coba beer view.
Yeah, no woman called Fumuko Jima, Saturn Day of Quasiara. Ha, one a thing with Fred Gualani say, Mumfa, Unqualanambra. Now, yes, Yen, Tino Posse, Unqualano, Edumuqua Jima. You see, I was sort of Fred Colas is here to Uncle Janaja. When Yanumpo. Oh, it's Yenti Facoranco. Aha, Janiano correct.
The head teacher of William Penica MA Primary School, Ms. Grace Sam Teria, provided evidence from the school's register that the children featured in the Jazeera news are indeed pupils of the school with clean attendance records.
From class 1 into I had no schools no or joint class. Every teacher offer 2 class. Inti now me check class 1 and 2 far inti sa kwala no ma che na de pen but see o me yime fo ma me wona azu inti akwala no endra agric officer no kra o ma menya abofra no kase mo so menya abofra kase ba register so I had I approve there abofra no ba school inti to me no the register tells it all. The register will identify if the child does not come to school or the child is not admitted in the school. The register is here. See, I have a friend over school.
About class.
Our class 1.
Okay.
Into our new academic year, into our class 2.
In an interview, the director of Special Service Cocoa Board, Charles Ameyaglo, said what happens borders on criminalities and has been reported to the police while it pursues other options as well.
What happened, what transpired here is criminal. It's criminal. Using children as young as 4 years is criminal. It's against the Children Act. And so the first reaction of this is to lodge a complaint at the police station. For people who have had several roles or have played several roles in it to be questioned. We have come here today. Everybody has listened to what has happened. Unfortunately, that doesn't end what report we have given to the police. If anybody who has played a role has been invited to come and just explain his side, just as we have heard, the president should cooperate. This matter will not go that far because we have come to understand the circumstances of it.
That's all for the news this morning. For more, log on to www.myjoyonline.com. My name is Bakwesi Shandoff. Do have a pleasant day. The show continues. Do stay.
A very good morning to you. Thank you for staying with us for the news review. Time now to dig into the papers, and we'll be joined by our guest shortly as we contemplate what the papers have to say. But two things I'll definitely be running by our guest this morning. The first one has to do with cocoa farmers in Ohia Mpe Enika, near Samareboy in the Wasa Menfi district of the Western region, who have vehemently denied a report carried out by Al Jazeera News that cocoa farmers in the area use their children for labor. We've spoken about some of these matters on the Volta Lake and all of that. And they claim that Al Jazeera journalists sort of coaxed them into doing something they were not aware of doing. They contend that journalists from the network coaxed them to bring their children to the farms as they wanted to do a holistic story on their challenges. And before you knew it, well, they were carrying it as a story. We actually did it on AM News this morning. I'll be running that story by her. The other bit I'd like to contemplate before we get into the papers. The Auditor General has a report, and we'll get some scoop on that. But guess what? The same things we've seen are happening again. This time, even worse. Just think about it. If you look at 2.5 billion plus, and you look at an extra 21 billion Ghana cedis that we got in dealing with COVID-19, and you realize that only 25% was spent directly on health, and that social relief and security issues created by COVID, all of that, 25%. Now, most of these funds then went to government programs like Free SHS, LEAP, etc. 3.5% went to GIFMIS, government's accounting system. Free water and electricity supposedly cost us some $250 million. When you look at the different figures in there, more than 22 million Ghana cedis for water bought from private water distributors, which cannot be accounted for, you'd realize that there are serious problems in this country. Serious problems. We keep talking about going to the IMF, getting a bailout, and doing this and that. There is so much rot in our country that if we do not deal with, we can borrow 2 trillion, 10 trillion. It will all go down the drain. You know why? Because it's like a basket with holes in it, and pouring water or funds into that basket, everything will drain out. You'll pour the whole world, you'll pour the sea into that basket, and it will drain out. And that's exactly where we find ourselves. Anyway, I wait for when we'll be joined by our guest, and then we'll take it from there. Educationist, Country Director of the International Child Development Program, Joyce Lanyo, who will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, let's see what we can do with some of the papers that we have here this morning. I'll start with the Daily Graphic. Ensuring success of debt exchange program. Engagement, cooperation, way to go. That's according to the Attorney General. I don't even know why the Attorney General has to say this, because you listen to some of the comments yesterday on Newsfile, Bryce Simmons, Senyo Hosi, and others, and you ask yourself, what the heck is going on? How long did it take Jamaica to get their program? What sort of engagement went into that? How long did it take other countries to get their debt restructuring? And we want to use what? We want to use how many months? And we already think we can get a debt restructuring issue or a program. How does that work? I am asking. How does it work? And in other jurisdictions, it wasn't done like we're doing here. So what exactly do we mean to achieve with this hasty? It's almost as though a problem had been created, and guess what? Let's hastily work it out, no matter the pain to those involved. Look at that 77-year-old who says, listen, this is where I am diabetic, hypertensive, and so many things. You plug this hole, you're basically giving me a life sentence. Cocoa bills are now in default, so to speak, because whenever you're going to roll over on any such bill, you must, according to the tenets of, the finance sector and across the world, you must inform. You can't roll over my bills or bonds or whatever without my permission. Yet that's exactly what has happened. So where exactly are we right now? And what does this do to market confidence? Anyway, Let me just welcome my guest before I go into the story from the Daily Graphic. Educationist, Country Director of International Child Development Program, Joyce Lanyo, joins us. Madam Joyce, a very good morning to you. Madam Lanyo.
Good morning, my brother.
It's a pleasure having you. I think this is my very first interaction with you, so Happy New Year to you as well.
Many, many, many happy returns.
Great. I just wanted to start off the conversation very quickly talking about two major issues. One, a story we did this morning in the news. Cocoa farmers, I'm sure you've heard, in Ohiampe Nika, near Samreboy in the Wasaminfi district of the Western region, are denying vehemently a report by Al Jazeera that they use their children as laborers on their farms. I know you're concerned about such issues, but the farmers are saying, no, that is not the case. We were tricked by the Al Jazeera reporters who rather coaxed us to bring our children to the farms as they claimed they wanted to put forth a holistic story. What do you make of that vis-a-vis what we've been hearing in our country on the Volta Lake and other places?
Thank you very much, my brother, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and good morning to your viewers. Issues around children and the child labor activities in the cocoa growing communities have been a thing living with us for a while, and those of us working within the areas have spoken and done a lot of advocacy against this child labor activity. But when you raise the issues, they tell you, oh, that's their mainstay. So probably they are mentoring their children into taking over when they are old and all manner of things. But look, these children are doing tedious and hazardous tasks, which is way far beyond their abilities. And that's where the child labor component kicks in. So you cannot actually agree with them in that manner, because the data that we have clearly indicates that children are being used in some of these farms rather than being in school and getting educated. So we want to drive the point home that even though Al Jazeera might have twigged or twisted the story in their favor, we really, really want to retrieve the point that this child labor activity is going on. And so we use this opportunity to speak that any activity of that nature that the children are not able to cope, weeding, carrying cocoa sacks, breaking pots, are actually against our labor laws and activities against children. And Ghana is a signatory to the UN conventions on the rights of the child, which includes activity as such. So in my view, we will have to still continue to drum home the point that, look, probably your child will not even like to become a farmer at the end of the day. And so he needs the opportunity to go to school and acquire certain skills to break that poverty cycle within the family. And so in my view, though the farmers are talking against this, the data here in Ghana is very clear that it's still happening to a large extent.
I get the point you're making, and we're all concerned, but when such journalism is used to paint people in a certain, put them in a certain picture, paint them with a certain paintbrush, I don't think it is all of these cocoa farmers who are engaging in child labor. So where do we draw the line?
Well, journalists would like to make their story strong. They would like to paint the picture that this is the fact, and so that is it. But, we will have to consider whatever it is that they are talking about, whether it is really the reality countrywide, or maybe a section of communities, cocoa growing communities. So even though the Al Jazeera journalists are trying to invest the idea that it's a nationwide activity, I think I want to agree that might not be the case, because a lot of development partners have been talking about this working in these cocoa growing communities concerning issues on child labor, child rights organizations like us are always on them talking. So to a large extent, I want to believe that even though that's what the journalists are saying, it is not
it's not the whole picture.
No, not at all. That's probably it's just a percentage. But we still want to talk about whether it's a percentage or the larger picture is still against the rights of the child, and we need to drum home the point so that our honorable cocoa farmers who are also contributing to our economy will appreciate and then let the children off the hook to encourage them to go to school rather than be on the farm with them.
Madam Lanyo, just a quick one I also want you to look at, maybe in the next 2 minutes, so that by 7:45, I beg your pardon, we can actually get into the papers. The Auditor General's report, we've always complained time and again that it is somewhat belated, by which time certain infractions have been brought to bear, money taken, misappropriated. But the latest one, some figures we're getting from there show that, look, in terms of battling COVID-19, and mind you, we still have the COVID-19 levy. Still, you go anywhere, you do this, you do that, you're slapped with the levy. 2.5 billion plus some 21 billion Ghana cedis, okay? That's what it looks like when you put it into Ghana cedis. Was mobilized. Only 25% went into directly to health, social relief and security issues created by COVID. The rest of it, we expended elsewhere. Free SHS, LEAP, etc. That wasn't budgeted for. That wasn't what it was supposed to go into. People say, look at that sum of money. How much did we claim we spent on feeding? How much did we say we spent on providing water, electricity, and all of that? How many of us benefited from it? And maybe wouldn't be in these dire economic straits if we had managed some of these resources well. What's your take?
Thank you, my brother. It's very, very hurting that time and time again, our bureaucrats, officers, misapply funds in that manner. Well, somebody was suggesting that the Public Account Committee should be given prosecuting powers so that they will be able to issue arrest of some of these public officials to be brought to book as to how funds are being dispersed. Can you imagine a whooping figure that was supposed to be meant for a particular activity is misused for other activities, yet we are still paying COVID levy? My brother, in my view, I think I buttress the point of the committee member suggesting prosecuting powers so that public officers will give proper account of whatever resources are given to them in the name of all of us, rather than doing things the way they want. And at the end of the day, we find serious gaps, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and we are not able to do everything. Every year, we have the Public Account Committee coming to meet, and the same issue keeps arising. What do? I will suggest these prosecuting powers be given to the Public Account Committee so that whoever is found foul of the law will be brought to book. And that will serve as a deterrent and a lesson to other officials that probably might be given the opportunity to hold the public purse and disburse in the manner as stated in the plan or in the budget.
Let's quickly get into the papers now. Ensuring success of debt exchange program, and I'm sure you have a take on this as well. That's the Daily Graphic. Engagement, cooperation, way to go. That's the Attorney General, and that's what most sides have been calling for. There's also Obecha Lamte interchange progressing steadily. You can see some photos of that. First ever tax appeals board constituted, and Lepoura Alhaj Jawula laid to rest in the United States. But let's start with that major story there. Banner headline on the front page of the Daily Graphic. The Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Godfred Yeboah-Dame, has called for extensive engagement and cooperation from all stakeholders to make the domestic debt exchange program a success. In an exclusive interview with the Daily Graphic, the AG said the nation had reached a critical juncture and it required all to come on board to support the common cause of repositioning the country for a turnaround and for growth. Mr. Dame lauded the Ministry of Finance for stepping up its engagement with the bondholders and relative stakeholders, a situation he described as key to debunking false assertions and increasing confidence in the debt exchange program. Now, explaining the basis for his legal opinion on the DDEP, the AG said the bonds were contracts between the government and the bondholders, and therefore any variation of the terms by a party without the consent of the other party would constitute a breach of contract. I am not saying this. This is the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Godfred Yeboah-Dame. Again, Mr. Dame said the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, that is Act 982, allowed the Minister of Finance to take measures to ensure fiscal discipline, but such measures per the law did not include a variation, alteration, or restructuring of bonds. Now here we find ourselves, we have roped in individual bondholders, some of them pensioner bondholders, and we've defaulted on our Eurobonds, that's a separate issue. Our cocoa bills, we've defaulted on that. You don't roll over a bill without anyone's consent. It's becoming a bit murky. What's your take on this situation?
Thank you, my brother. It's really, really sad that government is not considering our elderly citizens who have worked to put this country where it is, and that their sums, after hard years' work, should be put into an estate program that will affect them, their livelihoods, their health, and everything. Remember, government had engaged a variety, a number. I don't know how the engagement went. It started with the unions on pension funds, and they rejected it straight away. It went round and round and round. Now it has come to our senior citizens who have worked so hard to accumulate a bit of funds, take care of them even as they are on pension, and then support their families. And now they are going to be under this estate program for a number of years. I mean, clearly you are signing their death warrant, which is unacceptable. Pensions or whatever debt exchange, government should be ready to engage key stakeholders for mutual understanding so that nobody will be left wanting. But here we are. When this is tackled, it doesn't work, we go to the next group of persons. And the other, until it got to this point where literally our elderly who have put their money into investments are crying. There was this case, like you mentioned, where the man said he was going to be at the bank till he got his money.
Yeah, the 77-year-old.
Yes, 77-year-old going to bank, sitting there, watching people going and coming without anybody telling him that, oh, brother, we are on it, and that very soon you will have your money. But he's just there, disillusioned. It's heart-wrenching. And if it were to be my father, in fact, I would have really, really, really felt sad and maybe found some way out for him. So I believe we should attach a bit of heart feeling to some of these meetings or these strategies so that people will agree. There will be mutual agreement that, okay, this is what you are doing. But at this time around, I'm expecting to get so much to be able to take it up for myself and my family. But you are talking about 8 years, 10 years before your interest or whatever is paid. Government should come to the table and engage with anybody who is being rolled on onto this debt estate program for mutual understanding, mutual respect, for people to be comfortable with whatever is being rolling out. Remember, we will have to also speak and talk about issues concerning our economy. I'm not an economist though. So that if the government is going in a tangent that will affect all of us, we need to raise our arms in the air and talk about it and draw the attention to it. Now, all of us are suffering. It is being attributed to COVID. or Ukraine. But I'm afraid Ukraine and everything that is happening wasn't part of my savings when I started working 35, 40 years ago. So I will plead with the authorities, the government, the officials, to really come into terms with mutual agreements that will inure to the benefit of our pensioners or our bondholders and that of the government, so that they will find reprieve.
And you know something, the way we are practicing it here, the way we are trying to go around our debt exchange. Look, you go to Jamaica and it took what? Like quite a bit of time. Some of them took about 30 months, 18 months and the rest across the world to have a debt restructuring program. We're trying to do this in what? Some 6 months, thereabouts, even less. And that's what some people find problematic. There's also the bit about, like you mentioned, about 10 years. In fact, my own senior brother, Joe Jackson, put out some information, and indeed, it works out. You know, we're told there would be no haircut. Then now there is a haircut, and then your principal will not face any haircut. According to him, when you look at this infographic that he's put out, and good morning to you, Uncle Joe Jackson, he is with Daylex Finance, you would see that bonds maturing in 2023 will receive their first principal repayment of 15% in 2027. Final payment of 14% in 2023. And he says spreading the principal over 10 years is a haircut. So even your principal, so to speak, is under threat. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, like you are saying, because initially, certain sector of the economy spoke about this haircut, and we thought it was a joke. And government came out clearly that there wouldn't be any haircut. We heard it loud and clear. And now, here we are with the situation where there's going to be haircuts all around us, even the hair on our skin. Please, government, let's try to be truthful to we the citizenry. I think sometime during the inauguration of our President, His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo, he made certain commitments and statements about being participants and not spectators. So if it gets to a point where we are trying to be participants, I mean,
to be citizens, in fact.
Hearing, yes, should be given to audience, should be given to us, rather than brushing the whole thing through as if we do not matter in the situation, in the equation, in the discussion, and that whatever it is that they are deciding on will be loaded over us. I beg to differ that there should be some form of serious engagement with mutual and clear understandings, because you are talking about people's money. This is not government's money. And life on the line. People's life are on the line. People go to hospital every month, medication, 2,000, 3,000, with all our community economic crisis. Medication that used to cost 500 is now 1,000. The one that cost 1,000, 2,000. Where are they going to raise the money?
That's the question.
So I would I will plead with government to please consider those of us who put them there, that we matter in these discussions, and that whatever it is, they should come back to the table and engage. The Attorney General has made emphasis to that. I'm sure they have listened. So we hope that something will come out of this, rather than this stressful situation that some of our bondholders are going through. Even the thought of it can put you into another health risk. Just the thought of it.
Just the thought of it. I mean, one of the most basic ones, it could impact your blood pressure and get you, worrying, anxious all the time. It also, and I want us to wrap on this and move on, but I also got reminded because I watched one of our shows right here on JoyNews where a man came here and spoke about how he had felt, look, this is the safest way of protecting your money, buying government bonds. So he had done that and used other people's money. These are people with disability, invested their money. Some of them are in school, some are doing this or that, hoping that when the returns come, we'll always use it to secure them. Now the returns aren't going to come. how are they going to survive? So the dynamics are many. And maybe this quote by Isidore Isaac Rabi, a Galician-born American physicist, it's actually in today's Daily Graphic. You know, they always put a quote there. It's on page 17.
Yeah.
Maybe our leaders ought to contemplate this quote. It says, most new insights come only after a superabundant accumulation of facts have removed the blindness which prevented us from seeing what later comes to be regarded as obvious. It's like those who felt the world was flat at a point, and then others coming to say, no, it's spherical and all of that. Until that was proven, some people were even killed for that. So I feel that government ought to listen to this quote and maybe do a lot more accumulation of facts to remove whatever blindness may be preventing them from seeing what may be obvious to all of us. But let's wrap up with this. The country's first ever Independence Tax Appeal Board has been inaugurated, which with a call on the members to ensure speedy adjudication, accuracy, and fairness in tax dispute resolution and transform the country's domestic revenue mobilization efforts. That story on page 16. It's interesting for me, especially because we are constantly complaining about not raking in enough taxes, but other people would also ask you, what do we do with the taxes? Any quick response there?
Yeah, I absolutely think we should consider tax as the mainstay to be able to rake in some revenue for the government. There are lots of Ghanaians, lots. Where I live, for example, I always keep asking, who will be the next person to come and collect my property tax? The roads are bad. I don't have water. Who is coming? I have lived in this house for 2 years now and no sign of any tax. I've paid a tax, a number of taxes when I was not in this country. And I have come and tax that will help develop my community. I do not even see the key people giving me maybe a letter or coming around to say, look, you have to pay your property rate. You have to pay this. You have to pay that. So I think tax is a key component of national development. That if we do not consider collecting the necessary tax, we will get nowhere. Somebody was saying somewhere that, look, it's high time churches start paying tax. I don't want to go there. I'm not a politician, but I think it's something worth considering. That all the MMDAs and the districts will come around and map out churches to be able to receive some tax, because whatever we are giving are all monies that are being blessed to us by God. And we say, okay, let's pay the 10th of it. So the 10th of it, the church as an institution, what are we doing? The market women all over the place, establishing market everywhere, the little space market. Are we able to collect the taxes and report, or rather, we collect the tax and it's being siphoned into something else? There's a lot of misappropriation in terms of tax collection in this country, where they take the taxes and then it's either going to somebody's pocket or it's doing something. But if we do not collect tax, we are going nowhere. Ghana is endowed with a lot of resources other countries do not have. They leverage their taxes to develop their country. And their countries are doing very well. What about Ghana? The tax net. We are always saying spread the tax net. We are spreading the tax net. So where are the taxes? Where are they going? Where are the roads? If people see concrete development in their communities, they will run and give out whatever it is to give in terms of revenue mobilization to develop the economy. So it's a whole gamut of challenges within the tax sector, and I think the experts should come in and help us map out whatever it is we need to be able to take the taxes for national development.
Let's get to the Ghanaian Times newspaper. Just two stories I want us to look at. The third is just an add-on. So page 3, killer of Cape Coast dancehall artist to die by hanging. Why am I interested in this? Because for me, it's been a long time since I saw the capital punishment law triggered, where someone is actually to die by hanging. Bright Ellis, a 27-year-old who murdered a Cape Coast dancehall artiste, Emmanuel Akins, known in the music industry as Unruly Grant, has been sentenced to death by hanging by Cape Coast High Court A. Emmanuel Lodo, the presiding judge, gave judgment on the case that lasted for more than 2 years. And Mr. Vincent Nyineku represented the Attorney General in the case. The murder of the artiste followed a misunderstanding that ensued between him and the convict Ellis at the famous Orange Beach Resort near the Cape Coast Castle in February 2021. This also reminds me of that Benjilo case from way back. And the other story, child rights AG clash at Supreme Court. This one as well, I saved for you. A non-governmental organization, Child Rights International, and the Attorney General have filed 7 legal issues for determination before the Supreme Court in a suit in which the former wants the court to declare as unconstitutional the plight of street children, our street urchins. Led by its executive director, Bright Appiah, it is the case of CRI that the 1992 Constitution protects children, and therefore by allowing children to fall victim to streetism, the government was violating the children's constitutional right to education, health, human dignity, and denying them their social and economic rights. Mind you, though, we have some of them, though we've been taking some of them back, coming in from the Nigers and all other parts of, the West African sub-region. The final bit for you to reflect on. So we have death by hanging, capital punishment. We have child rights on street children. I will not read the story, but it says, to host 2023 Independence Day celebration. And for me, I have said, and I've called on the president, if I were president, I would scrap the Independence Day celebrations. For now, what exactly are we celebrating? We're in dire straits. We're on the ropes. In Tanzania, Magufuli, while he was alive, cancelled it twice. They made savings. One was used to build a road. The other, I'm not so sure, so I'll not go there. Recently, their president did it again. They saved almost, $500,000 or euros, and they're going to use that for schools to build dormitories. After the pomp and the pageantry, we are 65 and all of that, we've celebrated. Then what? We just create chop opportunities for different people, and the meager resources we have, we keep expending. Your take, Madam Lanyo.
Thank you very much, my brother. The first point I would like to talk about is the death penalty. I've been around for a while now. People have been sentenced to death, but I've never seen people actually being hanged or executed through the death penalty. And if you ask me, civil rights organizations on human rights organizations will come at you when it comes to the death penalty, because you are not supposed to take anybody's life. So I will suggest that the best punishment to allow such a person to linger in the prison cells, even though we will be feeding him and taking care of his medicals and all that. For his rights to be restricted is also an issue of psychological pain, and not knowing when you will be even executed or being released is also another torture on them. So if you ask my view, I will not subscribe to the death penalty, no matter what. Right. But then the thought that he's going to be there awaiting his death is enough of a punishment for him or her to turn to a new leaf. And indeed, it gets to a point where the president issues certain pardons, and if you are fortunate and you are being seen of somebody with good behavior, then probably you'll be released. So I will not subscribe to the death penalty in any way at all. And looking at the child rights and the streetism, education is a fundamental human right, and every parent should understand this and send their children to school. It is not for them to bring children to the streets from morning till evening, not talking about the risk, not looking about the dangers these children are faced, just to make money for parents. And indeed, they are not even Ghanaians. Our laws must work. Our laws.
Well, some are Ghanaian. Some are Ghanaian.
A majority of them, same face, same head structure and everything. Majority of them are not Ghanaians. And even the Ghanaians amongst them, they should be taken off the street no matter what, to get them into schools.
So in simple terms, you agree with Child Rights International on this. We have just about a minute left. That's why you agree with them.
Absolutely, we are all in the same advocacy terrain.
But the question is, we don't have the social structures, not even social welfare. I think it was recently one of my guests was mentioning to me that it just beats my mind. But if memory serves, each of the regions is getting about 20-something thousand cedis, to conduct its affairs. Can you imagine that? Social welfare.
Yeah.
Each of the regions getting about 20-something thousand. What can they do with that? Nothing.
That's the dilemma we find ourselves in. But it doesn't give anybody the right to send your child to the streets to beg for you to survive. At that stage, what it behoves on the parent to do for the child is send the child to school. And period. If they appreciate that, sending your child to school will break that poverty you are in, they will not be there.
So should we crack the whip more on these people we find on the streets? Because then aren't we going to be victimizing the children as well if we punish the parents? But on the other bit, most importantly, if your child is not in school, I mean, there are laws governing that. But if you're found for your child not to be in school, should we crack the whip even harder on such parents so that no one wants to do that?
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Harder.
Let's quickly look at, so Independence Day celebrations. I've shared my thoughts with you. What do you think? I think we should scrap it and use the money for something more beneficial to the state. Because in the end, look, I'm saying that some people will not like it. It just ends up in chop chop. Your thoughts?
I agree with you absolutely. Chop chop, chop chop. Currently, whole stadium is being refurbished or put up quick for this celebration. And after the celebration, what next? Ghanaians are not property enough. We are not, how do you call it? We are not actually accepting the fact to become patriotic citizens. That's the word I want to use. And then making ourselves available for national development. We do these flamboyant celebrations. Children are stressed, marching in the sun and all those things. After that, what next? Nothing. So I agree with you that it should be scrapped and the resources used for other areas of the economy. Places that do not have water. Water is life. It should be provided. They should be provided with water. Places that do not have electricity, roads, they are there plenty in Accra. Rather than spending these huge sums for others to maybe benefit, I am not too sure of this. And then at the end of the day, we are back to zero. Right. So I want to agree with you that it should be scrapped. I'm of the same view as you, my brother.
Thank you so much, Madam Lanyo, for joining us this morning. It's been really refreshing catching up with you, and I wish you the best of the day.
Thank you very much, and it's always my pleasure. Thank you.
And that is Educationist and Country Director of International Child Development Program, Joyce Lanyo, who joined us for the conversation. Just some headlines before I leave you. Government cuts spending to bone. That's according to Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta, but others have taken him on, even in terms of what the ministries are going to be spending. And in terms of the fact that we're having such a huge budget deficit this year. Economy Times, inflation to surge further, but there's also Ghana's economy expanded by 3.6% in 2022. That is according to the African Development Bank. Thank you for staying. Up next, we're going to serve you sports. And of course, yesterday we willed it, but it did not happen. Arsenal, the Gunners, just went past Manchester United. We scored first through Marcus Rashford, 17th minute, but they beat us by 3-2. That and more local action coming up right here on the AM show. Do stay. Thank you for keeping faith with us. Thank you for staying here. You know, we're your home of independent, fearless, and credible journalism. Time now for us to get into our first big story. And more than 24 aid and campaign groups have called for international creditors to cancel a large portion of Ghana's debts as it struggles to contend with an economic crisis. Ghana's consumer inflation rose to a record 54% year-on-year in December, driven by rising fuel, utility, and food costs. International reserves have dwindled to less than 2 months of import cover from around 6 months thereabouts. Today we discuss these issues with Professor Godfred Bokpin. He's a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. We also have Dr. Josh Bamfo, partner and head of Transfer Pricing and Economic Advisory Services, Anderson, Nigeria. Both of them join us for a conversation. But before we get to our guests, way to Lansah.
Hello.
Is here looking all gorgeous, colorful. You're adding color to my drabness this Monday.
No. I was just trying to complement the shades of blue.
It's a blue morning.
Yes.
Not in a bad way.
No, you're not in a bad way. But we'll be fine. I mean, you can just get a sense that I'm sounding a bit nasal, but I'm fine apart from that.
Should I get on your case in respect of your hair?
No, don't.
It's looking beautiful, but some of us wanted to keep the natural.
I've still got the natural.
It's still natural, but
it's still natural.
Something has changed.
I've actually not permed it. It's a silk press, so don't be alarmed.
It's a what?
Silk press.
I heard you talk about that in the makeup. The makeup, silk press. You will talk about that behind closed doors. But thank you, Dr. Bamfo, for joining the conversation. Thank you, Professor Bokpin, for joining the conversation.
Thank you very much.
We're grateful for your time. Let's...
Bamfo and your listeners.
Right. So we have Professor Bokpin on the phone and Dr. Bamfo on Zoom. Let me start with you, Professor Bokpin. We've heard so much commentary on this debt exchange and how we're handling it. I saw recently from Kofi Bento talking about how Jamaica handled it. 30 months is what they took, convincing people, jaw-jawing with the people. In other parts, 18 months and the rest. We want to do it in such a short period of time with all the baggage. I have also seen, just to set the tone for the conversation, you look at the likes of Joe Jackson. He posted recently on Twitter, and this is what he says. He says, bonds maturing in 2023 will receive the first principal repayment of 15% in 2027. Final payment of 14% in 2033. Spreading the principal over 10 years is a haircut. Are we getting the approach to this debt exchange right? And if not, where exactly do we find ourselves now?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start off by saying that we all agree, or largely, that Ghana's debt is unsustainable. That meant that a certain level of debt restructuring is unavoidable. However, we approach first the strategy, second, the content of the debt exchange makes it problematic and less desirable. And the reason we are unable to support the government in this scenario. We are not against debt restructuring. No, that is not where we are coming from. The manner in which government is operationalizing the debt exchange is highly insensitive and may create, in fact, the unintended consequences may more than offset the gains that we hope to make by enforcing this debt exchange. So it has more to do with the approach and the strategy government has adopted. That is why the pushback has been very strong. And I support the pushback. As I've said before, that no reasonable person would sign onto the debt exchange in its current form. It is possible that people would have signed earlier simply because they didn't understand. And if you remember, from December 5th, when it was announced, well, the interest it generated wasn't that much because the exclusion of individual bondholders meant that it was a bit easier dealing with participating financial institutions. But we started raising alarm that, no, this was going to affect the financial sector overall, and that if you look at the pass-through effect in the banking industry in terms of impairment losses consistent with IFRS 9, and then you look at the liquidity constraint because of zero coupon payment in 2023 and the staggered coupon payment thereafter, it was the liquidity gap alone was for 2023 will be more than 15 billion cedi in the banking sector alone, and that will constrain lending to private sector. And then if you look at the impact on the capital adequacy ratio of the bank, some of the banks, majority of them local banks, would actually be recording negative capital adequacy ratio. The interpretation of negative capital adequacy ratio is technical failure. It means that those banks have technically failed. So it has more to do, if you ask me, it has more to do with the approach. And as you rightly said, everywhere that this kind of restructuring has been undertaken, they were done in a certain way that allowed everybody to adjust. The adjustment process through the household balance sheet, private sector balance sheet, is very, very important. But here, so if you look at the case of Zambia, okay, the negotiation has taken so long, and it hasn't even been concluded. If you look at the case of Jamaica and the rest of them, but here you find one government in a certain African country that announced a debt exchange on December 5th and gave a deadline of December 19th. You could only do that if it was your own money. Even if it was your own money, you were going to be very careful that you do it in such a way that households are able to adjust. It was so sudden. And then also, of course, the pushback, the extension, and all of that. So to conclude on that particular question, this is where I stand.
But Prof, you cite the situation in Zambia, for example, but there are those who argue that this government doesn't have the luxury of time, really. It needs to help us get out of this mess as soon as possible. And so there are those who try to justify government's posturing by saying that they may not be the same scenarios.
No. You know what? That is the wrong understanding of how the IMF works. When the IMF reached staff-level agreement with the government, they were very clear that there were certain prior actions that needed to be met before the staff-level agreement will go through management approval and the board approval. In fact, one of the prior actions, hello?
I can hear you, Prof.
Yeah, one of the prior actions was fulfilled just last week. One of the prior actions was actually the audit of the COVID-19 expenditure. So you can see that report is out now. You know why? Because the IMF insisted. Because if you remember, Parliament has been asking for the audit of COVID-19 expenditure, okay, instigated by the minority in Parliament, but the government has said no. But thankfully, and that is why we often say that, look, it's good for the IMF to be in town, because when they are in town, some government becomes a bit more accountable than when, more accountable to the IMF and the World Bank than their own citizens. So as you can see right now, on the insistence of the IMF, government had to oblige to the audit of the COVID-19 expenditure. The results of that is what was published last week. So whilst we are all seeing the gaps in how payments were made for vaccine that never got delivered, COVID expenditure that were actually rechanneled to budget support, it's difficult to find where that is and the rest of them. I think the credit now can go to the IMF for insisting on this. The other prior action, and I have been very critical of the IMF, but I think at this level, we can commend them, because this is something that we had asked for ourselves, and our government never respected us. But now with the IMF, and given that the government needed an IMF program, they agreed, right? Now, that said, the IMF then said that Ghana government needs to take steps to comprehensively restructure its debt. They need assurance from our creditors and then financiers that they are on board in restructuring our debt. The IMF is not insisting that the government must restructure its debt within this shortest possible time and achieve 100% success before the program will be approved. It's about presenting a credible plan backed by the assurance of creditors and financiers that they are on board. You have secured their commitment in restructuring on your debt. That may be enough for the fund to approve the program. In the case of Zambia, they reached staff level agreement somewhere December 2021. And when they initiated the process of restructuring their debt, that was enough. And the fund approved their program in July. And up to now, they are still going through the process of restructuring while the IMF program is running.
So, Prof, basically what you're saying is our approach is faulty.
Yes, it has more to do with the approach and a certain appetite on the part of government to abuse the process and create financial repression in the economy. And that is where the focus should be. In as much as we support government in restructuring its debt, the approach, the scope, and the terms of the current debt exchange is certainly cannot be supported and cannot be justified on any serious ground.
Later, we'll come to you on what that latest Auditor General's report evinces when it comes to COVID-19 spending, the money involved. We'll come to you on that later. But let me go to Dr. Bamfo. On that same trajectory, especially as your economic advisory services are part of your forte, if you look at our system and what goes into what we're doing, debt cancellation, as Professor Bokpin was speaking of, in terms of the Paris Club, the best they can do for us is the least of our worries. In terms of our bilateral debt, and we all know the different dynamics, bilateral debt, commercial debt, all of that. Our bilateral debt is just about 4%, and 3% of that is what we service, or 3% of what we pay to service the debt. The bulk of it is commercial, and this is debt owed our investors and private individuals. That's on another leg. And then we have the debts to the World Bank, all those other entities, African Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, all those facilities we've taken. They are all in there. But especially when you look at the dynamics, do we have to have this sort of haircut, this sort of terrorizing, so to speak, debt exchange program that we're seeing?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what is important is to have some agreement with our creditors before the board of the IMF can actually approve this $3 billion facility. And to do that, I think it's important that first and foremost, you engage some of these key nations that are creditors to us. In as much as the proportion of the debt that we have with these nations are much smaller, even with the commercial creditors, where we can actually have leverage with them is to have the support of these nations, because some of these commercial creditors are actually citizens of these nations. And the way these guys have leverage over us is for some of these powerful nations, which could be trading partners, impose some penalties, either through high export taxes when we export to their countries and all that, should we clearly default on payment of such loans. So having their buy-in is going to be very critical. So the debate that is out there is whether to engage, these bilateral nations, either through the Paris Club and, big, credit nations such as China, which I think we owe around $1.7 billion. Do we engage them directly, or do we go through the G20 Common Framework Platform, where hopefully we can get the support of the G20 countries? And that has been a big debate. Now, proponents of those who want a direct engagement believe that that could lead to a faster resolution because you are engaging them directly. Those who are for the G20 believe that with the G20's backing, we could have more effective results. On the other hand, if you look at the track record of the three nations that have gone through this G20 Common Framework Program, we've not had very stellar results in terms of the rapid pace of resolutions. We've already talked about Zambia's case. I think Chad has been able to get something out of that process, but Ethiopia has not had a success story, in part because of the civil war. So we really don't have, a lot to really hang our hats on in terms of rapid resolution going through the G20 Common Framework. But that notwithstanding, I think it's very critical that we get some form of resolution to then enable the board to actually sign off. And I think that is where the time sensitiveness of this whole process comes in. So as much as I agree with Prof that, look, all we need to present is something that is credible, for the board to approve the facility, which is extremely needed, then later we can actually continue with the implementation of that particular credible plan. But even to present a credible plan, you really need, these creditors having a committee agreeing to whatever is being proposed. And I think whether it's, a debt cancellation that some of these action aid groups are calling for, or some restructuring of our debt involving some, haircuts and extension of debt payment into the future, will be necessary to give us that fiscal space, to actually embark on a process of growing the economy back again, and therefore being debt sustainable on a going forward basis. So I fully agree that, this engagement is going to be very important, whether we go through the G20 Common Framework process or we engage directly with either the Paris Club and other major bilateral national creditors. It's going to be very important to also help us deal with the commercial folks, who will never have an incentive to cancel our debt because everyone is in business to actually generate more returns. So they will not have an incentive to actually cancel our debt unless we get the support of these major nations.
And so the big question is that what impact will this make, like you've said, if these private investors or lenders say we are not interested, and like Benjamin mentioned, these other debts, which just form 3% of our total debt, what impact are we looking for? And is this even anything worth pursuing?
I think we don't have a choice because going forward, we'll still need this market, the capital markets, at some point in the future. Today, based on the downgrading of our sovereign credit rating by the independent credit rating agencies like Fitch and Moody's and S&P, we don't really have access to the international capital markets. But I believe that in the medium term, we'll still might have a need to go to that market. So it's important that we negotiate something that is perceived to be win-win for both parties. So to deal with these private, investors, I think it's important that we have the backing of the powerful G20 nation. If we should go through the common framework, or have the backing of some of these bilateral countries that have been creditors, in the past, knowing perfectly well that should we get our act together and the economy bounces back, they will tend to actually receive their returns sometime in the future. So I think it's how we articulate the case so that there's a perception of a win-win for both parties. But to go there and just ask for debt cancellation will be a stretch, and I don't believe any of these private creditors will buy that.
Professor Popping, while appealing for a debt cancellation, these aid groups also made a very interesting statement, and I would like to find out if you agree with them. They say wealthy private lenders must share in the cost of a crisis they helped to create and cancel the debt. Do you agree with this?
That's an interesting question. There is conventional wisdom in pushing for that position because of the excess premium that mostly poor countries, majority of them in Africa, have to pay by accessing capital from the same market that U.S. others also go to. So if you look at the yield over a certain period of time, you will see a certain portion that cannot be explained merely by economic fundamentals and is simply attributable to what we call the African risk premium. And therefore, there is this belief that some portion of African debt or poor countries are a bit unjust. and the higher yield have benefited worthy creditors or lenders, mostly from the global north. It didn't start today. Hello?
We can hear you, Prof.
Yes, it didn't start today. If you remember, from the early 2000s, the Jubilee campaign, okay, which now has been renamed Debt Justice. They started this same campaign also, and they were successful. Their campaign actually led to the IMF World Bank inspired EPIC and multilateral debt relief initiative, which contributed to over $100 billion of debt that were canceled for 35 poor countries, majority of them in Africa. So they have been in the system, and their goal now is to end debt on injustice. Now, in the case of Zambia, we also saw them pushing strongly, and in fact, in the case of Zambia, there were over 100 economists and development experts who signed a petition, particularly urging one of the global lenders to a lot of African countries in the name of BlackRock. And according to Debt Justice, BlackRock was going to make a profit in excess of 110% if Zambia had been able to honor its debt obligation. Now, you also see that when government announced the restructuring arrangement, particularly with the Eurobonds, the international creditors, the private commercial ones, had quickly formed a committee. And when I checked the composition of the committee, BlackRock was in there as well. That immediately sends a signal that it wasn't going to be easy for Ghana to restructure Eurobonds, because with the presence of these international lenders, global lenders, in fact, others had even called them predatory lenders, right? So because they were essentially milking the continent in terms of the excess profit that they were making, and therefore that also meant that they were taking risk. And if the risk has crystallized now, then they must also be prepared to have a deeper haircut in order to free up space for this. Mostly their justifications have come from the fact that the debt overhang would affect the poor and worsen inequality. So if you check the international aid, those who are pushing in the case of Ghana, they have implicit concern about poverty reduction, inequality, inclusive growth, because this debt-induced macroeconomic instability would affect the vulnerable more, and that any step in restructuring or in restoring macroeconomic stability will come at a great cost that would disproportionately affect the poor, the marginalized, the socially excluded. And for that reason, they are pushing for this. Yes, and I'll put it this way. If you look at where Ghana's debt is right now, in fact, in present value terms, it's more than 100% of GDP. Now, and the government, based on IMF framework, intends to restore debt to a sustainable level by 2028. Do you know something? That is almost impossible. I'm saying it's almost impossible because if your debt in present value terms to GDP is more than 100%, and you want to reduce it to 55% in 5 years, that may require you recording a primary surplus of no less than 12% of GDP. Look, a primary surplus of 12% of GDP, the economy cannot bear it. Look, there is no country, a low-income developing country, that has even been able to achieve a primary surplus of 5% of GDP consistently. No. Then if you look at the 2023 budget, the primary surplus, even with the budget latent with austerity that we are complaining, the primary surplus the budget is hoping to deliver in 2023 is just 0.7% of GDP. And we are looking at doing, for the next 5 years, more than 12%. In the next 3 years, as the projections were given in the 2023 budget, up to 2026, government is only hoping to contribute through fiscal adjustment to debt restructuring by only recording a primary surplus of 1.3% of GDP. And when you should be doing no less than 12%. And that is why you see that because the fiscal side is doing so small, they want to load a bigger portion of that fiscal savings to debt operation. And that is why government announced a debt operation that can only exist in theory and not in practice. Right?
A quick follow-up to that. We'll be looking at some of the concerns that these groupings have raised. But I'd like to find out from both of you, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Professor Bokpin. Is government itself taking a proper haircut in terms of its spending? And there are 4 issues I want to run by you. The Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, says government is cutting spending to the bone. It means they are cutting through the flesh right to the bone of spending. But here are some other dynamics to take stock of. We have a 2023 budget that has about 61.4 billion in terms of deficit. How are we going to get that money? Again, we're now told we'll even be borrowing to continue work on the National Cathedral after Parliament jettisoned that 18 million Ghana cedi proposal. When you look at all of these, and then to borrow Senor Hosey's words, when you're broke, you don't move from drinking beer to drinking champagne. How is it going to work? Has government itself shown enough commitment?
Okay, if I may come in before my other colleagues.
Yes, I said you should start, actually.
Yes, I think that is where the problem is. And that is why the resistance from domestic creditors has intensified. Because government, the moral hazard of it is such that domestic commercial creditors cannot access the debt estate because the government hasn't demonstrated its own commitment to burden sharing. So while government talks more about burden sharing, they do less. And you can see that in the budget you just mentioned. You can see the same government that claims needs to cut expenditure. Expenditure has actually gone up significantly in the 2023 budget compared to 2022. We have not seen any steps from government to downsize the size of government in a debt-induced macroeconomic instability like this. The least government can do is to show lean government as a way of courting creditors to the table. But government hasn't done that. So government hasn't shown enough commitment to burden sharing, and therefore you don't have the moral right actually to ask creditors to come and participate in the burden sharing. That said, the other bit that is of a concern and why some economists do not agree with the debt cancellation campaign by Action Aid, Oxfam, Debt Justice, and the rest of them, is that while governments go take this expensive debt from the international capital market, from BlackRock and the others, they actually don't invest them in the productive sectors of the economy that would benefit the poor. Oftentimes, these expensive debts are used to fund consumption with implicit corruption. Okay? And therefore, when we take this debt, we are unable to use it to enhance the cash flow generating capacity of the economy, and therefore the economic crash.
Right.
Of course, the interest rate at which you borrow has implications for productivity growth, whether at the private sector level or at the public sector level. But in the case of Ghana and many other African countries, there's so much abuse of borrowed funds, and therefore we have very little to show for it. And that is why they think that the idea of debt cancellation should not be an agenda item, maybe probably an AOD. But
Okay.
if you look at the effect of the debt-induced macroeconomic instability on the poor, inequality, the marginalized, and the socially excluded, then these international development organizations with particular focus on ending poverty, reducing inequality, then they tend to highlight that, yes, if we could throw the baby away with the dirty water, if we look at it, that government should be punished. Because on the average, government doesn't get punished. As we can see in the case of Ghana, government is not showing much burden sharing, and they are pushing disproportionately the burden sharing to creditors, even including pensioners.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Right. And that brings me to the very next leg of my question, which I will address to Dr. Bamfo. Do you agree with what Professor Bokpin is saying? And is it that government is given a haircut, but it's retaining its afro and it's choosing the easy way out? What's your take?
All right. Clearly, I think it's extremely important that government appears to be taking its fair share of the burden, because there's no way we can get out of this mess without everybody playing a role in terms of the burden sharing. And I think it's incumbent upon them to demonstrate that to the public before they make demands on the public to take a portion of these burdens. So I fully agree that a lot has to be done. I mean, at the end of the day, the devil is in the detail as to whether it's going to mean a leaner government, or it's going to mean throwing out some, key projects that when things were normal, they intended to do, but now they might have to give them up. Obviously, you need to look at value for money analysis to see, is it worth giving it up, or is it worth continuing with such projects? But by and large, I think it's very important that government appears to be significantly bearing a portion of the burden and actually bearing it, in this reality. Now, in terms of, what Action Aid is trying to do and our push for debt cancellation, and their push for debt cancellation, I agree with Prof that if you look at it from the perspective of helping the poor and mitigating, unintended, significant income inequality challenges, then it's a good cause. As to whether it's going to be successful or not, we really don't know. But it's important that we have these, groups, pressure groups, putting pressure on, bilateral creditors and the commercial investors to actually do something about our debt situation. Finally, I think it's important that we recognize that as a nation, we really need to look at some of these issues historically. When we got the debt cancellation under HIPC, between 2001 and 2006, what happened was that we had enough, fiscal space to have embarked on some major capital investment that will yield returns and therefore put us on a high sustained economic growth rate over years to really bring people out of poverty to high earning incomes. But what happened was that we started borrowing more from the private sector. Our first Eurobond was in 2007. And since then, we've visited that market 16 times, which means that should we even enjoy the cancellation of debt, this behavior of continuing to borrow, from the private, creditors has to stop, because should we get into this situation, we know that it's very difficult to get any form of relief from the private, creditors, because they are in business to maximize their returns.
And it's even interesting, just to chip in, as you speak now, you remember on the HIPC, we got so much, the concessions that were made to us, billions that were wiped off our debt burden. It appears we are happy, very happy, to get to this point, and then after begging for loans, beg as well to, have forgiveness. I mean, when is the cycle going to end?
So that is the problem. That's a cycle. You cannot get a debt cancellation and, after a couple of decades, you are back begging for another debt cancellation. So I think there should be a change in mindset. It's important that we, have all these infrastructure developments, but they need to be done in such a way that there's clear value for money. They can actually lead to a generation of, income across board so that it can pay for itself. But it cannot be a case whereby we spend on some of these projects, some could be inflated, and then years down the line, we can't even afford, to pay our creditors. So a bit of this, problem, we need to admit that our governments have not done great in the past, and this is not one particular government. And we need to strategically think about how we can actually continue to provide all these infrastructural developments, create an enabling environment for businesses to thrive, but do it in a manner that we can actually afford and have sustainable debt going forward.
Let me take your perspective on the latest Auditor General's report. and how much we are unable to account for in terms of our COVID-19 expenditure, and the potential of that hampering further government's drive to secure a debt exchange program. We know the bondholders say they cite many reasons why they're not interested in participating in the program. And then we are hit with this as well. How do you think this feeds into the whole drive by government? Let me start with you, Mr. Banfu, and then Professor Bokpin can share his thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think on the domestic side of things, because the whole arrangement is voluntary, all right, it's important that you build some level of credibility or trust, with the investment community in terms of sharing that burden. And part of the process of building credibility and trust is transparency. It cannot be the case that you are asking them to do so much without being transparent in terms of expenditures and how we got here. So I think that that level of transparency is going to be very critical on the part of the government for them to actually build some level of credibility with the various stakeholders that are supposed to voluntarily come in for these debt exchanges to push the maturity of those debts into the future and the payment of those interest payments into the future. So for me, I think where it comes to play is the ability to build credibility and trust so that, the stakeholders will be willing to voluntarily participate in this debt exchange program. If not, it's going to be very difficult for the government to actually implement this.
Prof.
Yes, thank you very much. I associate with the comment of Dr. Bampo. The timing of the report makes matters a bit complex for government, but that is what governance is all about. As I said, since COVID came, of course, in crisis moments, procurement infractions, integrity violations tend to be very high. And because government will always use urgency, speed, and all of that to sidestep important accountability measures. So when COVID came, the discussion globally was that keep spending to save life and livelihood, but keep the receipts. That meant that whilst you were on the go in saving lives and livelihood, perhaps procurement processes may delay, and therefore we are likely, or governments are likely to violate the procurement integrity measures, but keep the receipt. After that, in Ghana, reasonable people have been pushing for the audit of COVID-19 expenditure. And the reason was that whilst government was blaming everything that was happening in this country on COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war, the view had been that Ghana actually made profit from the virus. And the reason that view is very strong is that if you look at COVID-19 related inflows, Bank of Ghana gave the government 10 billion cedis. Whilst we were in COVID-19 lockdown, before the lights came on, government had taken $1 billion from the IMF in the form of rapid credit facility. We got support from the EU. In fact, there were some World Bank projects running that they changed their nature to make those cash flows immediately spendable to support government fight against COVID-19. So if you look at the COVID-related inflows and even the COVID expenditure that the government presented to Parliament after the minority in Parliament, was it last year or so, threatened that they were not going to whatever until the minister comes to present a brief Parliament on COVID-related expenditure, you could see that there was a gap of about 8 billion. There was a gap of about 8 billion cedis that could not be accounted for in the COVID expenditure that the government presented to, the Minister of Finance presented to Parliament. And therefore the question was, where is this excess money? Because we spend lesser than how much we got in the name of the virus. Now, and there was a whole lot of discussion around that. And the audit that should have been done actually didn't take place. Now, with the IMF when government made a call to the IMF, that also strengthened the bargaining power of civil societies and academics. And therefore, probably the IMF also seeing that there is a need for the government to be a bit more transparent, because the IMF had seen what was going to come and would have wished that government would be a bit more transparent. So those thorny issues, that could be a stumbling block to even generating acceptability of the IMF program. They were also mindful in trying to make sure that government addresses those concerns. So the IMF made the audit of COVID-19 a prior action, and the result is what we are also discussing right now. Even there, you can see the infractions. So the lack of value for money, COVID vaccines that had been paid for that were not delivered, and some COVID-related inflows that were rather channeled to general budget support and the rest of it. Why was that so? Because COVID also happened in the year of election. So government was abusing the public finance in the name of COVID-19.
Prof, just a little bit. You're saying government was abusing public financing, or the public purse, basically, in the name of COVID-19?
The public purse.
What do you mean? Can you break it down?
What I mean is that they took advantage of the COVID and overspent. And our fiscal deficit went, in fact, Ghana's fiscal deficit in 2020 was the highest in the sub-region. So whilst other countries were doing less than 8%, Ghana's fiscal deficit in 2020 was more than 15% of GDP. Okay, so the current crisis we have here, you can also trace it to the election-related excesses of 2020 that government blamed on COVID. This is what has brought us here. And you realize that, fine, to make matters simple, and because of the pandemic nature of the Parliament suspended the Fiscal Responsibility Act in 2020.
Right,
that opened the floodgate for government to spend. But of course, even before 2020, government never respected the 5% threshold imposed in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, because they treated COVID-19, they treated energy sector indebtedness and financial sector cleanup as below the line.
When it comes to the issue of going to the IMF, this government has been bashed for not being proactive during the time where experts like yourself had said it was important that we go to the IMF as soon as possible. Government was saying there was no need, and in fact, the finance minister stated emphatically that we were not going to go to the IMF. Once again, we find ourselves in a situation where there are many calls for government to cut down its size and expenditure in the budget. Government is dragging its feet, hoping that the debt restructuring program will be successful so that it can present good books for the IMF board approval. The Christian Council is asking, scrap this deadline or suspend the deadline for the debt restructuring program. Already we've seen about 3 postponements to the deadline. Would you say here again, government is delaying a decision that it will have to take eventually, and once it delays it, it will further compound our problems?
Precisely. Look, you made the right point. Government unwillingness to go to the IMF could also be explained by the fact that the IMF will shine light in every dark spot of our public finance. So you can see that one immediate effect of government making the call to the IMF is the audit of COVID-19. As you can see now, you can see the embarrassment that is bringing to government. I'm not saying an embarrassment as in a negative sense, but you can see the revelations in the report. The country that needs money to sustain pre-senior high school could pay over $80 million for vaccine, and up to today, it hasn't been delivered. So that was one. Then the other thing also was that until the IMF came to town, Ghana's public debt was a matter of multiple choice. Choose the one that you like. The government kept telling us one debt to GDP ratio, whilst analysts were of the view that our debt to GDP ratio was far higher than what Bank of Ghana was reporting, than what Ministry of Finance was reporting. Look, towards the end of 2021, Bank of Ghana was reporting a deficit of less than 80%. In the middle of 2022, we were reporting a deficit of around 76.6% of GDP. When the IMF came into town with their debt sustainability framework, we were then told that our debt to GDP ratio was actually more than 100%, because the debt accounting mechanism excluded state-owned debt that were treated as off-balance sheet in the central government debt accounting system. Meanwhile, the burden of those debts were actually on the same state. So you see that with the debt sustainability framework, they then roped in cocoa board loans, Dati, Ursula, and the rest of them, put all of them. In fact, even the debt sustainability that the IMF did excluded certain arrears to contractors. We'll talk about that one some other day. So now, and with all the back and forth, government was living in denial that our debt was unsustainable, right? And we kept telling them that, no, your debt is actually unsustainable and all of that. So guess what? Then in the 2023 budget presentation, government officially gave its blessing to what they had considered rumor and doom prophecy, that our debt was unsustainable. The present value of our debt to GDP ratio was more than 100%. We had breached all the debt sustainability indicators.
Right.
We're trending far above the policy dependency threshold at the baseline estimation. Now, here we are. The other point you talked about on the expenditure cut.
So briefly on that, Prof, just briefly on that next point.
Yes. You know, the earlier government takes those steps, the better. Because where we are now, we cannot support creditors to come on board the debt exchange without government doing that. Other than that, they will get away with the murder. Now, my other concern, whilst I've said that, is that any further delay in having some kind of credible plan with the buy-in of creditors would affect the staff level agreement. Because remember, the staff level agreement, 1 month is gone. All the projections in the staff level agreement are as valid as assumptions underlining those projections. And some of those assumptions may not hold for that long. So if it delays, then it means that there might be a need for a recalibration and adjustment in the staff level agreement before it goes to the IMF Executive Board. But it is government that requested for an IMF program. It was not domestic creditors. So the government that requested for an IMF program must do more to ensure that the program is approved on time. And it could not blame mere mortals, ordinary Ghanaians who have invested 500 or whatever for the delay in the program. And that is why I agree with you that government must demonstrate greater commitment to austerity and cut expenditure in these hard times, so that in good times, if government wants to have 1,000 ministers in good times because we can pay, that is fine. But in bad times, in crisis moments like this, you cannot have that government, size of government, and come and ask creditors to trade off their consumption.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Bamfo at this point in time. So you look again at COVID-19 expenditure, and like Professor Bokpin has said, we had a glorious golden opportunity to do quite a lot with that. But did we? So you look at the 2.5 billion, that's the equivalent of about 21 billion Ghana cedis that was secured. And only a quarter of that, about 25%, went directly into COVID spending. So I'm talking about health, social relief, security issues created by COVID. A majority of the sum of money actually went into items like free SHS, LEAP, etc., which were not on the radar. Then again, you look at the fact that a paltry 3.5% of spending went through government's own accounting system, that is GIFMIS. The question is why? We said we were giving out free electricity and water at a cost of $250 million. About 50 million of that is still outstanding and paid. That's the equivalent of about 600 million Ghana cedis. Then finally, we said that we're going to purchase vaccines. $80 million was paid in advance. No vaccines. When you look at all of these, the supply of hot food and all of that, what picture does it paint? And again, for me, I reiterate, if we don't plug some of these loopholes and the things we keep seeing in the Auditor General's report, we can borrow. It's like pouring the entire Pacific into a basket with holes. You can pour the Pacific in there and it will still be empty. Your take?
Yeah. So I fully agree that it's important that government is accountable and is very transparent about how they, spent some of these inflows that came in during the COVID period. However, what we need to bear in mind is that during the COVID period, clearly government's projected revenues were nowhere to be met because you had a lockdown. That meant that the economy almost ground to a halt. Economic activities, were on the downside. So you wouldn't expect tax revenues to meet your budgeted revenues that you had prior to the commencement of COVID-19. So without decrease in tax revenues, even though there were these inflows, I want to believe that there were some expenditures that they found necessary that they needed to spend on.
Which they could have been more transparent about, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if you're going to use it, just let the people know this money was initially, we're given this money for this, but we're going to, sometimes it's almost as though we were irrational in Ghana that the people wouldn't understand and that only leadership at that ivory tower can understand.
I think for me, that has always been something that I think governments, especially in Africa, need to really stress on. You see that in the private sector. Transparency is key for credibility, and credibility is key for doing business with stakeholders, because you need trust. All right. So yes, there could be a reasonable basis for you to have used those funds to spend on other activities or programs that were not directly related to COVID-19, but you can actually explain why. And people will understand you for doing that. But sometimes we go ahead and have these kind of expenditures, and it's only after the fact that this type of audit reports then exposes some of these expenditures and leads to more questions than answers. So I fully agree that it's important that government is able to explain why they made those expenditures when they weren't directly related to the COVID-19 challenges. But that said, I fully agree with, Prof, that, look, the level of credibility that the government needs in order to be able to actually execute, this, debt exchange program for the domestic side of things, and also to deal with, our foreign, creditors, is going to be very important, because without that, we don't get this IMF, bailout. And if we don't have this IMF bailout, we're going to really struggle to turn this crisis around. So anything that they need to do to actually bring about trust and credibility to actually move this forward and get the approval from the board of the IMF is going to be very critical. So I share the same sentiments that it's important that government look at some of these expenditures and be able to come to the public and tell them, look, we are going to make some tough decisions. And the earlier we make those decisions, the better. The timing of decision making is as critical as the decision that you actually make. Sometimes when those decision making is delayed, then it might not have the right results if you had made it timely. So my view will be for government to actually, first of all, be more transparent, explain, the nature of those expenditures and why they made them, and also build credibility in this process and ensure that this program becomes win-win for all stakeholders. We all have to buckle up for now, because when things turn around, we are going to be beneficiaries in the future.
So as we get ready to wind down on this conversation, my final bit goes back to the domestic debt exchange and how it's been dealt with in our particular case. We have a context, but what does the law say? When you look at today's daily graphic, it says ensuring success of debt exchange program, and this is the banner headline: engagement, cooperation, way to go. That's according to the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. He is calling for engagement, cooperation. But in terms of the legal elements, and this is for both of you for reflection, we've seen the cocoa bills rolled over without those who had contracted those bills or subscribed to those bills giving their consent. That, in terms of the market, is a no-no. For some people, the amount was paid into their accounts, and the following day, it was taken. For some, they withdrew them when it came through, and they've now been told to return them, which is interesting. Now, let's look at what the Attorney General says. Explaining the basis for his legal opinion on the DDEP, the AG said the bonds were contracts between the government and the bondholders, and therefore, any variation, that is changes, of their terms by a party without the consent of the other party, that is the bondholders, would constitute a breach of contract. That is point one. Again, sourcing the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 982, allowed the Minister of Finance to take measures to ensure fiscal discipline. But such measures, per the law, did not include a variation, alteration, or restructuring of bonds. In dealing with this entire situation, have we handled it well in respect of even the very laws the government is supposed to be operating by? I'll start with you, Professor Bokpin.
All right, thank you very much. As you rightly said, I am not a lawyer, so my view will be informed largely by my profession. My deepest concern with the approach government is adopting is how government is distorting the mechanism of our financial market, and therefore undermining confidence in the financial market. Can you imagine that cocoa bill matured and government just decided to do what they did? You know, I'm afraid maybe government, we have no idea the unintended consequences this will create for so many years to come. Look, government is the safest to lend your money to in the local currency. We should not create, and the government borrowing rate is the benchmark, more or less, for private sector borrowing. So, in the name of this crisis, government should, I'll plead with government to be measured in how it interferes with the workings of the financial market. Other than that, we may be sowing a seed that will not be comfortable to reap the fruit so many years to come. That is what I will say, because the way we understand the workings of the market is both in terms of price discovery, consumption smoothing, and all of that. I am afraid we are reversing 3 decades of progress. Don't forget that where Ghana's financial market is today, including the capital market, it has taken us more than 30 years to gradually build this. And I'll plead with government to be mindful of where we came from, with the price we had to pay in having the financial market the way we have it today. I'm afraid we are going backwards.
What could be the consequences if we go down this road and, like Majority Leader H.A. Mensah says, if the middle class, so to speak, is wiped off, if our savings culture is impacted, if our financial system hits rock bottom, then what?
Yes, I agree with the Honorable Majority Leader. This is our savings culture. We are undermining it. If people don't have confidence in the financial system, especially with government instruments, and if you look at the financial market, government plays a very dominant role in terms of securities, trading, and all of that. And therefore, if people don't have confidence in government securities, what happens? If people have excess liquidity and they think that it's risky going to lend to a private sector or someone else, they may want to take their money from the financial system, maybe look outside the country, or maybe buy foreign currency as a proper store of value. As we speak right now, if we don't get an approval for the IMF program in the next couple of months, with the current account deficit widening, it will burn through our international reserves. And we don't have sufficient international reserves, and that will bring pressure on the cedi and further compound our ability to tame inflation, right? So I'm thinking, yes, we also sympathize with government because of the level of crisis, where our debt is and what we need to do to restore debt sustainability. But I will lean towards the Attorney General's position that let's engage broadly with transparency and open hands, right? That will get the buy-in of creditors and all of us. Let's share the data. Let's tell Ghanaians everything. What is the point in hiding the state of affairs? We are in crisis. Of course, the debt we are talking about is not only NPP's debt or Nanado's debt or Ken's debt alone. We look at the public debt in cumulative terms. The public debt is Ghana's debt since it was founded, right? But of course, we can disaggregate it and see who has borrowed more compared to others. But the debt is cumulative. So part of the debt we have to restructure today, some might have been taken 15 years ago, some 10 years ago, before this government came to power. But once you are in the helm of affairs, you take ultimate responsibility and find a more a sustainable way to addressing it without compromising the integrity of the financial market.
Prof, just hold for us as we wind. Let me bring in Dr. Bamfo. And you heard Prof talk about, so what exactly do you have to hide? You must be very open. It actually reminds me of what I believe it was Oxfam recently said about the last time we went to the IMF, before this one, in the erstwhile administration. Actually, our process was one of the most open in the world.
Yeah.
One of the most open. I think one of the top 5 or so. In fact, the most open one. And I'm asking myself this time, what exactly went different? Dr. Bamfo, so what is your take on that and the legal elements that I brought to bear?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I will go the route of Prof and also have a disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist. But first and foremost, I think what is important is to take the Attorney General's position. You know, the Minister of Finance, the government has a responsibility to get us out of this crisis. And to do that, very tough decisions have to be made. However, you know, this is a contract between government and various stakeholders and the public. And it's important that they get the buy-in of the public or the stakeholders or the creditors. And that's the reason why this debt exchange program is voluntary, meaning that they cannot shove it down the throat of the stakeholders. And if you are not going to be able to shove it down the throat, then that means that you need to be able to influence the process by being credible, by being trustworthy, and by being able to present a case where every stakeholder, including the government itself, is taking a portion of the burden. And I think that is going to be critical in the success or lack thereof of this particular program. You know, being able to demonstrate that, look, we are all sharing this burden. You know, it might not be equally, but it has to be equitable. So that should be the focus of government and making sure that, look, this is a success because there's no other way. If we don't get the IMF board sign-off, you know, we're going to go deeper into the crisis. And I think Prof has articulated that. You know, without, you know, the bailout, we're going to have significant challenges in terms of, you know, our exchange rate. And if our exchange rate further depreciates, we're going to be in a bigger trouble. Then that means that imported inflation is going to skyrocket. Inflation rate is already over 50%. So we have no choice but to get this right. But to get it right, we need to really make sure that we do the right things. And as you guys have said, you know, if previously we're very transparent and it led to a successful program, then we need to do the same. So for me, that is going to be the takeaway that, look, a lot is so dependent on the outcome of this process, getting the sign-off of the IMF, not only the 3 billion facility, but the credibility of the IMF being hawkish on us and ensuring that we are more prudent in our expenditures, you know, and are able to turn things around, and then can go back to implementing growth policies that enable the economy grow at a very high rate during the first 3 years prior to COVID-19 hitting us in 2020, of having an average high economic growth rate of about 7%. We've done it before, and I think we can do it again, but it will require government to be very proactive, very open, very transparent, and, you know, be able to build trust with all stakeholders so that we can go through this process together as a nation and come out together as a nation if we are successful.
We've spoken so much about this IMF deal that if we're not careful, we may lose sight of the fact that this is not the magic wand that is going to change our economic fortunes. In fact, government does admit, Information Minister, during the time the announcement came that we're going to the IMF, mentioned that this was just to deal with our balance of payments issues. And we know the government has said that it would initiate other programs, measures to help us gain more revenue, which will generally deal with our major economic issues on the general front. We know the government has initiated the gold for oil deal, but do you see that those other measures are coming to play even as we wait for this IMF deal? And what are your general impressions about how, if there are any of these measures coming to play, will impact our general economy?
Hello. So I think, is it to me or to?
To you, Doc. To you, Doc, first.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So I think it's important that government doesn't, overly depend on the IMF bailout as some, magic wand that is going to turn the economy around. We still have to make some structural changes over time. If you look at the depreciation side of things, one of the things, the bad habits we got into was anytime there was a shortage of forex, we're highly dependent on going to the capital market, euro bonds, get some dollars, and then plug it back into the forex market to meet the excess demand. All right. Now, if we have such arrangements where we can actually trade with our major trading partners, such as Saudi Arabia, and we can actually use resources such as gold in exchange for a key product such as petroleum products, so that we don't have to actually use our limited USD in the market, then that would be helpful. So I think government has to be more creative on a going forward basis so that there's less pressure on forex and our international reserves, so that this balance of payment crisis that we are facing can be averted going forward. So that is just one of such examples. Now, going forward, I know that it's going to be extremely important that government really executes its policy of being more export-oriented. Today we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Arrangement, AFTA, where we are hoping to have more intra-Africa trade. And how we do that is going to be important. Can African economies agree that we're going to use some currency beside the USD so that we don't put undue pressure on us trying to access USD in order to trade amongst ourselves and actually grow our economies? So I think it's going to be important for government to be very creative. Thirdly, when it comes to key projects, as I said, we have a huge infrastructure deficit in our country. There's a need for us to actually bridge that gap. But we need to think through how we go about, building those infrastructures, all right, be it roads, bridges, or what have you. Can we actually have some public sector and, private sector partnerships where they can come up with projects that have clear value for money and can pay for itself? All these creative ideas are going to be extremely important, in addition to the IMF bailout, for us to come out of this crisis on a much stronger footing going forward. So I think that those are some of the things that government is thinking about, and they need to be very creative so that we come out stronger than when we went in.
Right. Prof, what about you? Do you see us putting in place these measures that will help us fix the general economy? And how successful do you think these measures will be, if there are any?
All right. Thank you very much. I know I have not seen enough. Ghana's problem is largely governance, which manifests explicitly in economic mismanagement. So we have not seen enough governance reforms which would anchor gains from the IMF program. And the IMF itself is not claiming that their intervention is what Ghana needs totally to come out of this. No, it's an economic program. But the problem is more governance. So, and then you mentioned gold for oil. You know what? Nobody has demonstrated to us with data how this gold for oil would actually lead to a reduction in price. I haven't seen that. You have gold. There's a ready market for gold. And you claim that because you don't have FX, foreign exchange, to give to the BDC, that is why the depreciation of the cedi feeds into export price. But the gold you have has ready market. So you could actually go and sell it and get the dollars to fund your import. You don't want, and Bank of Ghana has been buying gold today as part, not only today, as part of our international reserve management. So you have to demonstrate to me how using the gold in barter exchange is far better off than going to sell the gold on the international market that we all know, and we can monitor the price and see everything, as compared to a barter system that we don't know much about. Of course, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any demonstration of how the savings from gold oil exchange would inure to the benefit of consumers, as compared to the approach we have used over the years that we all know and we can monitor. Who are the faces behind the gold for oil exchange? Who are they? What is their interest in all of this? How is it monitored? What are the standard measures and all of that? I haven't seen that. So I don't think that we should just jump on this as though it's the gospel that it will change at the end of the day. Somebody should demonstrate to us and convince us, because the point is that we are open to change. If the data is made available and we all can do the assessment and all of that and say that, okay, yes, this compared to this is far better, so we should go this way. Other than that, we will all be here, and one day this gold for oil, if we are not careful, it will be full of corruption and insider dealing, and the country will shut down.
If I get to Prof, the other question is, what are we losing while trading this gold for oil instead of directly exporting and earning some returns?
Pardon, sorry. Can you?
I'm asking if your submission is basically what we are losing in terms of trading the gold for oil instead of exporting and earning some returns. Is that what you're basically trying to figure out?
Yes, that you have a certain amount of gold. There's already a ready market for it. You know the international price. So you could sell the gold and get the foreign exchange.
Right.
Which then can be used to fund our oil import. Now, the problem is scarcity of foreign exchange. And now you are making the case that because of that, the gold that you could sell in order to get the dollars, you rather take the gold physically and go and exchange it for oil. And I'm saying that you have to demonstrate how this will bring extra benefit as compared to going to sell it to get the FX, which you can also use to fund your import. You have to demonstrate that. And you have to demonstrate how this will filter through the pricing mechanism and reflect in a lower price at the export. You have to demonstrate all these things before you press the button for go ahead.
So how many ounces of gold for a certain specific amount of crude? Oil. That is something that we need to know. We know that we are told that
the mechanisms. Who are the brokers? Who are the middlemen and the middlewomen? What is that? What is their interest? What these channels? What are the transaction costs? How is that related to going to? How is that cheaper and bring savings compared to going to sell it through the international channel that we all know?
Right.
So we need to know all those things. We will be prepared to come along if we are confronted with the data that this is the savings and this is how the savings will trickle down to the export. That's all. We are interested in nation building. Okay.
Right. We have to go, Prof. and Dr. Bamfo, but I can't help myself. I'd just like to know from you, if you can give me a yes or no answer, fine. If you can give a 10-second response, fine. Our sources, and recently was corroborated by Bright Simmons on Twitter, You know, looking at the geopolitics going on with Russia and how it's become a pariah state, so to speak, especially with Western allied countries, if we found out that our oil was coming from Russia, what would that mean? Just give me a straightforward response. I'll start with you, Professor Bokpin.
That would be interesting, but let me just highlight this one. I hope it helps. The global geopolitics itself may be inuring to our benefit on one hand because the West themselves are interested in courting Africa to their side. And therefore, it is possible that the West, the US and the others may bring some pressure to bear on the IMF to give Ghana a program and tamper with the terms a bit in terms of the requirements and all of it. Because we've seen how pressure was brought to bear on the IMF in how quickly they reached the staff level agreement. We've also seen that before, that Ghana was a middle-income country, and yet the World Bank guaranteed one of our Euro bonds, right? It was contrary to the World Bank principles.
Right.
So the geopolitics is, you can see how our president himself is playing into the global geopolitics in how he highlighted Burkina Faso and Russia issues along our borders, right? Keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Bokpin. He's a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Dr. Bamfo, do you have a take on that? If not, we can wrap the conversation.
No, I'm fine. I think that what I'd rather, just quickly mention is that I think the rationale for this gold to oil and petroleum products exchange will be the fact that gold, being a commodity product, is more volatile. So that if you can then trade directly, for petroleum products that is more stable, especially now, then maybe there's a potential of us getting some benefit. But I do agree that it's important that government demonstrates the benefit to the public. Thank you.
Well, I guess the question is always at what value? But that's another discussion we can have.
Right.
Bernice?
Yes, and talking about the gold for oil deal, we're going to be having a conversation on that shortly because, there are some stakeholders within the whole industry who believe that they will be rendered jobless if
the licensed gold exporters are crying foul.
If this deal goes as the way it has been, initiated currently, and they are also worried that government is allowing the PMMC to handle this. We'll be back to have that conversation shortly. Do stay. Thank you so much for staying here on the AM show. It's now time to have that conversation about the gold for oil deal. And Daniel Krampa is chairman of the Chamber of Bullion Traders Ghana. We also have Abdul Razak Al Hassan. He's a communication director, Ghana National Association of Small Scale Mining. And they all have issues about this new initiative by government. As I mentioned earlier, we are told that the first consignment has arrived. We get to receive a lot more details on how this is going to be executed over the coming days. But let me start off on that note with our first guest, and he will be sharing their perspective with us. Good morning to you, Mr. Krampa.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Great to have you here on the show. Now, what exactly are your concerns about this gold for oil deal, and why now? This was announced by government a few weeks back. Why are we hearing from you now?
Please let me correct your first listener. I'm the CEO of the Chamber of Bullion Traders. I'm not the chairman.
Right. Thanks for that.
Okay. The policy from government, and I think that we support the idea that the government has come with a policy that will help the foreign exchange flows and the falling value of the city. But we of the chamber are of the view that we can partner government as how he has done with the large-scale mine. We can give a portion of whatever that we buy from the small-scale miners and export the rest so that we can also sustain our business. Basically, that's what we are trying to say.
And with the current arrangement, you don't find yourselves within that space to support government this way?
Please come again. Your line is not that clear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm asking if you do not find space to provide the support you're talking about within this current arrangement.
No, with the current arrangement, the policy seeks to make only PMMC the agency that can buy the gold that is produced. Previously, we were also in the market, we buy some to meet the export needs of our members. But with the coming into force of this new policy, it means that licensed gold exporters are completely cut off from selling directly to people who invest in their business.
And so you're saying that you'll be totally rendered jobless? Is that it, totally?
Not totally as such, but with the export trade, we are totally out of business. We are not allowed to export gold on our own.
And so what would this mean for your businesses?
It means that we won't be able to meet the demand that investors invest in our business. You see, we have a system whereby those who need the gold bring in foreign exchange from outside. And we use it to finance the operations of artisanal and small-scale mining. So in a way, we are promoting investment into the small-scale mining sector of Ghana.
Right. Let me move to Abdul Razak, who's with the small-scale miners. What is the impact of this deal for you as well?
I think with the gold for oil, we small-scale miners, it shouldn't have been a very big deal, because everything about mining or gold that we extract here, we assume or we prefer that it should be sold here, and then at least all the necessary agencies will benefit whatever we are taking, because small-scale mining sector is meant for only and only Ghanaians. But where we have the challenge is that sometimes government take decisions without sitting with the stakeholders, like ourselves, who are extracting the gold. Because if PMC are the only group who will be buying such gold for government, we don't have issues with that. But where are their offices located? Because we are scattered all over the country. And at the same time, are they monopolizing it? Or how are they going up the whole thing? But this time, any time that government is initiating a good program, instead of sitting with the stakeholders, we all judge or come out with a proper way of doing it. They plan it, just dump it on us, and we don't know where it's coming from. So that is the challenge. If not, this gold for oil, yes, we are producing gold, and we are the small-scale miners who try and then who are extracting this gold. If we give it to our government, we sell it to Bank of Ghana, and then they exchange it for foreign estate. Why not? We are okay with it. But sometimes the decisions are taken and dumped on us. That is why we have the challenge.
Do you feel sidelined in this whole arrangement?
Exactly so, because we do not sit with anybody. Ours is we just heard that government has initiated this, and then they want all licenses, export licenses and what and what. Meanwhile, these exporters or these buyers are all over the country buying gold from us. So right now, where have you instituted your offices? Which shows that, okay, you are banning these people. So you small-scale miners, if you are at Takwa, go to this office. If you are at Boli, go to this office. You don't have those offices scattered. Meanwhile, you came out with a policy direct, and then you've given an ultimatum. First General, what you've done all exporters from buying gold from this. So where do we locate? So do we keep the gold and prove that when you are exhausted or when things very you monopolize the prices or what? So we need to know, at least come down to the level of our people, let them understand that this is what we're supposed to do so that they will benefit whatever government is doing.
Mr. Krampa, you are CEO of the Chamber of Bullion Traders Ghana, and what you basically do is to promote partnership of your members and to lobby government with regards to policy surrounding the industry. Are you also saying that you were not given an audience by government on this matter?
consulted. We are only called in to discuss what the government had decided to do. And any attempt to dissuade them from that policy was not taken in. So basically, we were not consulted before the policy came.
So what does that mean? I mean, extending this conversation, you can talk about the debt exchange. We saw it with the e-levy. Now it's the Oil for Gold program. The lack of consultation, or as some people would refer to it as the opacity in government policy execution. What does that mean for you? How can it be remedied in this specific case?
I think that it is good that we all come together and then discuss this policy again, because we think that we have a role to play in the policy that the government will come out, which will be beneficial to both government and then companies that have been given licenses to export gold. So basically, that is our stand.
Let me also bring in, was that Mr. Krampa?
Yes, please.
All right, let me bring in Abdul Razak Al Hassan as well. Especially as we're talking about small-scale mining and what the impact of this could be. The licensed gold exporters have said that this would basically make them redundant with the PMMC coming in to do this. What are the real dynamics of it? Have you had any interactions with government on that specific point?
As I said earlier, government have not met us as small-scale miners, and which we discuss anything. Theirs is to bring the policy and dump it on us. And at the same time, this is good for oil thing that we are talking about. Which group or which type of miners is government targeting? Is it only the large scale or the small scale is part of it? If the small scale is part of it, let's ask ourselves, government is fighting illegal mining, which we all agree. But most of these licenses, small-scale miners, some of them have their licenses kept at the ministry there, which are not signed. So all these things, we need to have discussions with government so that at the end of the day, we all know the direction he wants us to all operate. And then when we do that, this good for oil will not be problem, because the extraction and everything will make sure that our men would then know when they extract the gold, where they are selling, they will sell the products. But if government sit down, do his own achieve what they want to do, because we don't know.
Abdul Razak, we're sort of losing you. I don't know whether you could reconnect and maybe not reconnect, but maybe reposition yourself so we can catch what you said again.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Better now. Please go ahead.
I'm saying that government policy, yes, we agree, good for oil. It will benefit the country. We are not against it. But government shouldn't always sit down, plan this, and dump it on stakeholders. If we don't have a conversation, a discussion to see how best this thing will be prudent for the whole country, it will be a thing which will be good, but the benefit will be less. Because, for example, if PMMC doesn't have the umbrella or the offices all over the country, and you are expecting small-scale miners to come and sell gold to government, and they don't even know the offices that they want to go. Meanwhile, you've banned the buyers who buy gold from them from exporting. These exporters and those things, you've revoked their licenses, and you want government to buy this gold, and you've not decentralized your system. How are you going to achieve the gold that you want to get for this oil?
Are you saying that as a guess? Are you conjecturing, or are you saying that as a fact?
It's a fact. You can contact PMMC. How many offices do they have in the country?
Right. So in other words, if we want to roll this out, it's going to be a problem because the PMMC doesn't have tentacles everywhere, but you are on the ground. That's the point you're making.
That is what I'm saying, because we, the small-scale miners, are on the ground. We are all over the country. We have, I think, out of 16 regions, I think only 3 regions that we don't mine. So if these regions all are bringing gold out, and the PMMC has not covered this whole regions, the 13 regions, how are they going to get what they want? And they've not even showed us where and how they are going to be buying the gold. whether they are going to buy it at this well market price. How are they doing it? We need to
So basically the dynamics, how it's going to play out, which is still not known, and that's the problem.
So, just sorry to interject there, but government says that it's going to sell this in Ghana cedis. The PMMC will buy it in Ghana cedis at spot price with no discounts. I just needed to chip that in because of the bit on how much you will be paid for it.
Do you have any reactions to that before I come to you with the next question?
Yes, I think buying in cities, we have been selling our gold in cities already. I think the bullion, what our CEO will testify that we, small-scale miners, we sell our gold and we take the cities. So they will go and do their foreign exchange and those things. We don't have any problem, but they need to disseminate the information. They need to, for us to understand how government is coming out with these processes, so that we also know how to educate our members for them to sell this gold. We don't want this gold term to create a problem whereby people will be smuggling them. That is why we are all bringing our minds or our ideas to fore, so that when we sit down and government sits with us and we understand, we also disseminate this information to our small-scale miners who are licensed small-scale miners, and they understand the dynamics. I think nobody will have the fear.
Mr. Al-Hassan, just a quick response. The first batch of oil for the gold has touched down. Does it appear, now that we've already started the process, does it appear there's going to be any change in terms of the approach from government's end moving forward? What do you think?
For now, they've taken, yes, they still have the room to sit with us. I think they brought the first consignment. Let's see how it goes. And we are also here to support government. We are not here to make sure that government fails. So, but they should also understand and come to our level so that we all join and see how best this program will be fruitful to the nation, so that it will benefit all of us. That is what we are only asking for.
Mr. Akrampa, Mr. Al-Hassan has raised concerns about how this will further worsen the issue of smuggling of gold, which we're already trying to deal with. How will this whole arrangement, seeing that you and the small-scale miners have issues with, how would it affect government's drive to deal with smuggling of gold?
You see, the PMMC came out with a statement on the 17th of January. And in that statement, it says that they can buy gold at only two places, Patase in Kumasi and then the Diamond House in Accra. It further says that if you have less than 5 kilos, PMMC wouldn't buy it. They have to go and look for licensed gold exporters and sell it to them. But once the government came out with the policy, it's only PMMC that will buy. We presuppose that they will establish offices in almost all the 13 administrative districts where small-scale mining takes place. But this has not been done. And also, it came out that it will be buying at world market price. Now, the miners are aware that PMMC will buy gold at this price. Now, if you are a licensed gold exporter, you are going to buy gold from them. You can't get any discount because already PMMC have come out to say that it will buy at the world market price. So these are some of the operational issues that I think we need to sit down. And then there's also this element of the exchange rate. Most of the licensed gold exporters exchange their dollars at the foreign zero rate. But the PMMC is going to get money from Bank of Ghana at the Bank of Ghana rate, which is lower than the foreign exchange rate. Now, who takes care of the difference between the commercial rate and then the Bank of Ghana rate? So these are some of the challenges that we think that we need to sit down and iron out so that the system can take us smoothly.
But Mr. Akrampa, government is not pushing you out of business totally, is it? Because it says that it requires 20% of the entire stock of refined gold at refineries in the country. So this is not pushing you out of business, is it really?
No, I think the fact is not as you are saying. What we are saying is that most of our members...
Just a quick point. You say the fact is not what she's saying. So what is the fact?
The fact is that we rather propose that government should allow us to operate alongside PMMC as how he has done with the large-scale mine. Let us sell a portion of what we buy
to government,
and let us export the same to meet our obligation. I think that also brings in the dollar to the system. And you see, if let's say we also sell, we bring in the dollars as it is now. We are even proposing that let us reduce the time that it takes to repatriate from 30 days to 10 days, and then we bring in 90% instead of the 80%. So these are some of the things that we have got in order to help the system. So I think that going forward, maybe the government will call us again so that we sit down to discuss some of these points.
But the other leg to this, Mr. Krampa, is that government is buying only refined gold. What this means, according to the Vice President, is that local refineries will be able to make, some business, get good money, even as they await or work towards obtaining the required London bullion market certification. Is this not good news for the industry? Doesn't it offer the opportunity for expansion and growth?
Currently, what I know is that most of the gold that is taken out of the country is not refined. All the gold is not refined. It is only assayed to determine the value. It is not refined. We have a lot of refineries in Ghana who are not working.
Yeah, so this will give them business, right? If the Bank of Ghana is buying only refined gold, then it means that these refineries will start working, and this would enable the industry to grow and expand.
I don't think the policy talks about empowering the various refineries that we have in Ghana to refine the gold that we produce. But even the PMMC itself is establishing the refinery. So I think that they can also use that refinery to refine the gold that they are going to sell for the oil.
And so you don't think this will bring about growth?
Currently, we don't have any statistics that shows that it will bring the needed growth that we hope that when the policy is well established, this growth that we are talking about.
Okay, so let me just help us. Let me quote the Vice President. These directives would also help local gold refineries obtain gold supplies from the PMMC to support their operations as they work toward obtaining the required London bullion market certification. So PMMC would hand over the gold to these local refineries before they're given to the Bank of Ghana for reservation. So I'm just asking you if you don't believe that this will inure to growth and expansion.
Now, the PMMC itself has a refinery. So how is it going to see the gold that is supposed to refine to other refinery? I don't think the PMMC refinery will have capacity to be able to refine.
In other words, Mr. Krampa, you doubt this submission by the Vice President?
I don't know whether I should say I doubt it or not. But what I know is that the capacity that we have for the various refineries that we have is enough to refine the gold that is produced by small-scale mines.
So to put it differently, if you don't doubt it, do you believe in what the Vice President said?
Yes. I think I side with him, but the point is that let us sit down and see how best we can come out with steps that can be taken for the various refineries that we have in Ghana to have access to gold that they can refine.
Hi, thank you for your time this morning. Daniel Krampa is CEO of the Chamber of Bullion Traders Ghana. We also had Abdul Razak, who speaks for the Ghana National Association of Small-Scale Mining, and we've been discussing the gold for oil policy. Really grateful that you could stay with us on the AM show. It's now time to get interactive with you, and the number to call 0302-211-691, 0302-291-691. And Benjamin is nodding because I didn't come to him for help today.
So the second time you mentioned the number, though, 0302-211-691. Yes.
Yes.
At a point you mentioned 291-691.
No. Probably you didn't hear me well. Well, while we wait for your calls to come through, let me just let you know the Ghana Revenue Authority wishes to inform you, especially those of you who wish to apply for tax clearance certificates, to do so online via taxpayersportal.com or download the Ghana Taxpayers app on Google Play Store or the App Store. Applicants who visit the taxpayer service centers will be assisted by officers of the authority to apply. Applicants are also required to indicate the taxpayer identification number of the institution or organization requesting the certificate so that they can receive a copy. Applicants should take note and be guided accordingly. Kindly contact GRS toll-free 0800 900 110 or via these WhatsApp numbers 055 299 000 or 0200631664 or send an email to gra.gov.gh for further enquiries. And the GRA also wishes to inform the general public, especially persons registered for value-added tax, that's VAT, that the Domestic Tax Revenue Division has commenced the implementation of an electronic invoicing system of VAT referred to as EVAT. This involves integrating the invoicing systems of VAT-registered taxpayers to the Commissioner General's invoicing system. Kindly contact the GRA once again, toll-free 0800 900 110 or via these WhatsApp numbers 055 299 0000 or 0200631664 for further enquiries. Benjamin, so today we've been talking about debt cancellation and the call by some aid groups in Ghana for that. We've also been discussing the gold for oil deal. This morning we've been joined, our first caller is Kojo Mensah. Hello Kojo, where are you calling us from and what are your thoughts?
Good
morning.
My name is Kojo Mensah. I'm calling for Accra and would like to make a little contribution and also draw your awareness to the some of the occurrences that have been happening.
Please go ahead.
If I may deviate a bit. You are discussing about the inability of the head to feed the students, or I'm wrong?
Heads. Okay, Kojo, I think you're talking, you want to contribute to the conversation on Joy?
Exactly.
Okay, you are actually on JoyNews.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's on Joy FM.
Okay.
So, please speak to my producer.
Let me rechannel to that end.
Okay.
But don't you go off the line. Just hold on the line.
Hold on the line.
That will probably be done for you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it appears he immediately mentioned the issue. I guess you could latch on that he had wanted to speak.
Yes.
But we've been discussing quite a number of issues this morning. Gold for oil. What's your take on it? The LGs, licensed gold exporters, are saying this could actually kick them out of the business. We've had a conversation on that. We have also talked about the debt exchange program. Are you personally affected? How do you feel about it?
We have a caller from Nkwanta. Is it Melvin?
Melvin from Nkranza, not Nkwanta.
Nkranza. All right. How's Nkranza this morning?
Very well and very peaceful.
Right. Let us know what your thoughts are.
I've been following your program. I bet. Hello.
Hello. Yes, please.
Yeah, I've been following your program for some time, and I get so lost with the kind of things going on. It's like mostly when I listen to you, it is looking like the government, the president, and probably the finance minister are running Ghana as their private company or private entity. You know, there's a program you want to engage in, and then instead of holding extensive stakeholders meeting, you just wake up, and then it's like you bring initiatives yourself, and at the end of the day, the respective stakeholders begin to fight it. Even though what we are doing is a good thing, but engage us well, so that we will all bring our views and ideas to the table, and then we drive towards a common goal. But you just be there every morning, we wake up, we hear a new thing, the government is doing this, debt exchange is doing this, these people are complaining, we will not adhere to it and whatever. So I'm pleading with you, if there's any way to get the government informed, to really sit down with stakeholders before the initiatives are brought to bear, so that we can all rally behind it. But for what they are doing, it's like they managing their personal business. So thank you very much.
Thank you for contributing to the program. So Benjamin, when he says if there's anything we can do, I'm just wondering what we can do. Government is the only one that can agree to sit and have conversations, and as we've seen over the time, there's been a lot of pushback to many things, and government had its way, later had to come and restructure, revise, e-levy brought down to 1%. It's just so many things.
You know something? Yeah. With children, it's been proven. When you want to have your way with them, treat them like adults, speak to them, let them know what the consequences of their actions are and all that. And it will surprise you how, though some of them can be terrifying terrorists in a nice way, they'll pay attention to you. A lot of the time you can have your way by simply reaching out to people. But when you hold all the cards to your chest and you feel, look, I can do this without you, that's where the problem
and in this case, Benjamin, you were there in the first place because of the people. They gave you the nod to be there. Okay, talk about this COVID issue and how Dr. Banfu even, tried to give some logical reasoning to why some of the chunk of that money went into budget support, and said yes, because at the time we didn't have revenue. It makes sense, but would it have made any difference if at the time government came to us and spoke to us and was transparent enough to say, this is how much we need to run government, this is how much we are earning, so we need this and X or Z amount to do this?
If they had, Bernice, we wouldn't be here questioning those same issues.
Exactly. We have another caller, Michael. Hello, Michael. Let's hear you. Hello, Michael. Hi, Michael. Can you speak up a bit, please?
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's hear you, please.
Your program is very educative, and I've been following it quite some time now.
Thank you very much. Sure. Is this Frank or Michael?
My name is Frank.
All right, Frank. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. My problem is the opacity of this government. I don't get it. First I want to ask, how much, gold, reserve, deposit do we have as a nation? How much is our reserve as a nation? And the government don't even have a company, like a gold mining company. So this means he's going to buy from, at my place, we have a company called Newmont. Let's look at it from this way. Newmont is, a very big gold mining company. Are they going to buy from Newmont at the world market price? And bear in mind, Newmont is not going to sell to you, even if you're buying at the world market price. Newmont is not going to sell to you on your exchange rate. They will sell in dollars because they are a foreign company and they need their returns back to their country, right? Again, there's no transparency. This is my problem because, for instance, who are the middlemen? As one of your panelists were asking. Who are the middlemen? Who are the men in this program? Is it not just a Japan deal or whatever they try to smuggle through? What is happening?
Right, Frank. So, because you've asked a couple of questions, let's just try to set the record straight a bit. So, government has directed all large-scale mining companies or firms to divest 20% of their entire stock of refined gold at their refineries to the country's central bank in Ghana cedis. So this took effect from the 1st of January 2023. Now, according to the Vice President, the Bank of Ghana and the Precious Minerals Marketing Company, that's the PMMC, will coordinate with large-scale mining companies to ensure compliance with the directive. He further states the gold to be purchased by the Bank of Ghana and the PMMC will be in cedis at spot price with no discounts?
Ghana rate they're going to buy, right? That's my question. Are they going to buy at the Bank of Ghana rate? And if yes, has there been any stakeholder consultation? Like bring everybody on board to ask questions, like for people to agree, buy into the program, you know. We know maybe it's going to be very beneficial. But my problem is this not just a Japan bill? You know, because this government consistently has not been transparent.
Right, Frank. Thank you very much for contributing to our conversation this morning. And Benjamin, he's right. There are many questions that we need answers to from government, especially on this gold for oil deal. There is no published actual policy document on the issue. All we know is some slides that have been put together detailing how it's going to be executed and what the Vice President has told us. It will be important if we can have a policy document that rightly explains what this is all about and how it's going to be executed. But thank you all for contributing to the show. But we have a special message, don't we?
We do. You are the divine light of my life who makes every day of my life heavenly. My love and admiration for you increases by leaps and bounds with each passing day. I'm hopeful for an exciting future. Touching.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, my beautiful wife, Mrs. Akosia Krantema Adams Nunu. Not mine, make no mistake. It's from your husband, Derek Nunu, HR department of the multimedia group. And I just had to do this. It skipped my mind in the course of the news review. This one came through from Positive Vibration. You said then, watching live from the UK, kindly wish my sweet girl, Selena Jau, in the UK, Lebanon Road, East Croydon, a happy birthday for me. Well, belated, but I've done it.
Yeah, right. Thank you all. And if today is your birthday, a very happy birthday to you. We pray that you live long enough to join us every morning here on the AM show. And that'll be it from Benjamin and myself. Thank you so much for making time to join us. God willing, we are back again tomorrow with everything that excites you and makes an impact in this country. Up next is News Desk. Do stay.